Yeah. Well, good morning again and Happy New Year to all who's attended the meeting. I'm calling the board of retirement meeting to order today being Wednesday, January 6th, 2021. Before we proceed, we need to ask Bonnie to provide some instructions. Then after that, we'll hand it over to our esteemed secretary to run the election. So Bonnie?
Prior. Mr. Knox?
Yes, Bonnie, I can barely hear you.
Sorry, is this better?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Knox?
Here?
Great. Mr. Santos?
Present.
Ms. Gray?
Present.
Mr. Bernstein?
Here.
Mr. Oakham?
Here.
Mr. Moore?
Here.
Mr. Kehoe?
Here.
Mr. Robbins?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Ms. Zapanta? Ms. Zapanta? Okay, and I know she is here.
Yes, I'm here.
There-
Sorry.
Thank you so much. Staff participating in the meeting include the CEO, Santos Kryman, CIO, John Grable, Chief Counsel, Stephen Rice, AEO, JJ Popovich, Legislative Affairs Officer, Barry Liu, Alan Cochran, Bernie Buenaflor, Cassandra Smith, Carlos Barrios, Carly Natoya, Cynthia Martinez, Kathy Delino, Kim Hines, Richard Bendel, Tamara Caldwell, Ted Granger, and Vincent Lim from the management team. We also have Jill Rawell, Johanna Fontenot, Michael Herrera, and Fern Billingy from the legal division. And consultants participating today are Joe Ackler, Naomi Padron, Tony Rhoda, Shane Dowsett, Robert Schmidt, Janet Jennings, Ashley Jennings, Ashley Dunning, and Jenny Krangle. Trustees, if you have a comment or question on any item, please use the Zoom chat option to be placed in the queue. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mics until you are ready to speak. And now we may proceed with the agenda.
Thank you, Buddy. This time I will hand it over to our esteemed secretary, Gina Zapanta.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the January 6, 2021 Board of Retirement meeting. Our first order of business is the election of board officers. As the past year's secretary, I will be conducting the elections for the 2021 board chair, vice chair, secretary, 1 JOGC committee member, and 3 audit committee members. During the election for each position, I will ask for nominations from the trustees. As these are nominations and not motions, no second is required for a nomination. Are there any questions? Okay, no questions. So the first election will be for board chair. Do I hear any nominations for the chair position?
Yeah, Gina, I would like to nominate Alan Bernstein for board chair.
Okay, thank you. Do I hear any other nominations for chair position? Okay, do I have to ask again or wait a certain time?
You can ask 3 times.
Technically, it's supposed to be 3 times for the
Yes,
Robert's rule.
that's correct.
Okay, so let me ask one more. Do I hear any other nominations for the chair position? Just in case.
Move nominations be closed.
Okay. Okay, so then those in favor of nominee Alan Bernstein, say aye. For the
Aye.
board chair of 2021.
Aye.
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 Okay. Okay, great. The board chair of 2021 will be Mr. Alan Bernstein. Congratulations. Okay. Next. So the next election will be for the vice chair. Do I hear any nominations for the vice chair?
I'd like to nominate Vivian Gray.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do I hear any other nominations for vice chair?
I'll move nominations be closed.
Okay, those in favor of Vivian Gray as vice chair, please say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, the vice chair for 2021 will be Miss Vivian Gray. Congratulations. Okay, the next election will be for secretary. Do I hear any nominations for chair? Or, I'm sorry, secretary?
I nominate, and I haven't even asked you, Gina, do you want to do it another year?
I need to consult with myself, but yes, sure, thank you.
I nominate Gina Zapata.
Yay. Okay, so do I hear any other nominations for
Move
secretary?
to close nominations.
Okay, congratulate myself, Gina Zapata, for board secretary 2021. Okay, so then there's one JOGC committee member.
I move
do I hear
Herman
any
Santos.
Okay, any other nominations? Do I hear any other nominations for JOGC committee member? Okay, those in favor of Herman Santos for JOGC committee member, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Congratulations, board. Oh, JOGC committee member Herman Santos for 2021. Okay, now there's three audit committee member positions. Do I hear any nominations?
Yeah, I nominate Alan Bernstein for one of them.
Do I hear any other nominations?
I'll nominate Vivian Gray.
I'll nominate
Mhm.
Ron Oakham.
Okay. Do I hear any other nominations? Okay,
I
so
move-
then,
I move that we close the nominations.
okay, those in favor of nominating Alan Bernstein, Vivian Gray, and Ron Oakham for the audit committee, please say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, so then they've been voted in for the audit committee of 2021. Congratulations. Okay, does this conclude the election portion?
Yes.
Very good. Congratulations, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, thank
So
you.
then now
to
I'm
all-
going to hand it over. Oh, yes, hand it over to the new board chair, Mr. Bernstein.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bonnie, before I get started, is there anything you procedurally need to do or set up?
No, you may proceed.
Thank you. I want to thank all of last year's officers for the great job they did, and I want to welcome all the people who were elected today and to thank you for your trust. And that's enough for me. We'll get on to the agenda. The next item is item 3, the approval of the minutes of the meeting of December 2nd. I need a motion, please.
Keith, I'll move.
Prior second. Second.
So they've been moved in second. Bonnie, roll call, I believe,
Yes.
please.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Aye.
Mr. Who was that? Santos? Okay.
thank you. Ms. Gray,
Aye.
Mr. Oakham,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Kehoe,
Aye.
Mr. Robbins, Mr. Robbins,
Aye.
thank you. Ms. Zapanta,
Yes.
Chair Bernstein,
Aye.
the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. Item 4 is public comment. Bonnie, have we received any slips from the public?
Yes, we did receive one request from Everett Wade, which is regarding item 10A1. I am allowing him into the main session now. One
you.
moment. Okay, Mr. Wade, you may unmute yourself by pushing *6. You will have 3 minutes to address the board, and you may begin when you are ready. Mr. Wade, you may press *6 to unmute yourself, and you may now begin.
Good morning to the administrative LACERA board. My name is Everett Wade, And I'm a LACERA client, and I appreciate this time. I am asking the Administrative Legal Board to make my current healthcare plan retroactive to May 2020. I am requesting this action based on receiving information from a LACERA representative who told my wife that the ALADS plan I had prior to retiring was the same plan LACERA offered, largely due to the fact we trusted what the representative told us, coupled with the mental state we were in at the time, having been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. We opted to go with the LACERA plan the representative offered, believing that the two plans were the same in context. As a result, I have been billed over $25,000 by the City of Hope, with additional charges still coming in on a monthly basis. Not to mention the City of Hope, as recently as this month, has forwarded my matter to collections, making it difficult for me to refinance my house in my situation should I not make it with this illness I have. As mentioned in the letter, I retired after 31 years of honorable service with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. Throughout my career, I made it a point to always treat people with respect, treat people with honor and dignity, and always use common sense when handling a matter. Because of my diagnosis, I will need medical treatment through the City of Hope for the rest of my life. Knowing this, I cannot begin to tell you how much stress and problems this has caused me and my family. Simply put, to recap, had we never contacted the LACERA representative and been told that the two health plans were the same, we would have never opted for that plan. We would have opted for the higher plan, and I wouldn't be in this stressful situation that I am today. And
Thank
that's
you.
exclusion, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Wade.
Mr. Wade, thank you for your comments. We are not able to respond to public comment, but we will be addressing your matter in executive session later today, and staff will get back to you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we are now on to item 5, other communications, starting with item A1, November 2020 All Stars.
Yes, I believe Mr. Popowich will announce the All-Stars.
Yes, sorry about that. I had myself on mute. I apologize, everybody.
Happy New
Thank
Year,
you.
JJ. Take it away.
Happy New Year. So this is the time of our meeting when we get to recognize those folks that have gone above and beyond the call of duty to help their members and their fellow LACERA staff members. And so I'd like to announce the All-Stars. And if they're there virtually, stand up. Larissa Fradkin, Dana Brooks, Tina Young, and Nathan Amick. So thank you very much for everything that you do for LACERA, and thank you very much for all of LACERA's employees for everything they do. Thank you.
Thank you again. Now we're on to item 2, the CEO's report. Mr.
Yes,
Simon.
thank you, Chair Bernstein, and Happy New Year to everyone on the line. I wanted to highlight my CEO report is in the packet that you all received, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things that was not included in the report that I think is important for you all to know about. So before I begin the report, I just wanted to say thank you to Trustee Santos for his chairmanship last year. It was an extraordinary year to be tasked with leading an organization through a pandemic and staying abreast of all the issues that we were addressing on our operational side and making sure that our members continue to receive a high level of service, even as we transitioned from an on-site business model to a remote and virtual model. And so I just wanted to say thank you for your leadership and your support this past year. I also wanted to congratulate Chair Bernstein
Really
for
quick,
accepting.
Mr. Kramer, really quick. Thank you very much for the compliment. I am grateful that I'm no longer going to get phone calls on Saturdays or late at night. Mr. Bernstein, get ready.
Wait, I didn't know about that part of the job. Wait.
Yeah, it's in the fine print, Mr. Chair Bernstein. So I'd also like to congratulate Chair Bernstein and Trustee Gray, Vice Chair Gray, for accepting the leadership reins from Mr. Santos. I know that all of us at LACERA who work here are committed to making sure that we work tirelessly to make sure that your tenure is a very wildly successful one. And so we look forward to working with you, Chair Bernstein and Ms. Gray, and all of the trustees for that matter, moving forward. And so as I detailed in my report, we're beginning the second month of March Madness, which covers the period between December and March, which is our busiest time of the year. As expected, we started receiving a high number of calls from our active members inquiring about retirements. We're a little ahead of the pace from last year in terms of inquiries, and we're still waiting for the onslaught of applications to come in the near future. And so as a result of the ongoing calls, I wanted to let you know that we are going to be offering, opening up our call centers to our members in this Saturday, or actually the next 3 Saturdays, moving forward for half days, in order for us to make sure that we're responsive to our members and that we're able to process the applications as quickly as we possibly can. So that is something that was not included in the report. I thought it was important to bring that out and mention that to you all. We also continue to try to reduce the number of staff people that are coming into the office. We've managed to reduce it from about 25% of our staff to somewhere around 9 to 10%. We're trying to figure out how do we reduce that even further, being that the reports are that the surge there's going to be a surge on top of the surge on top of the surge. And so we're doing everything that we possibly can to protect our staff and of course to protect the health of our members as well. Our member services center remains closed for walk-in members, but we still have our virtual call center available and our virtual counseling sessions available moving forward. The other thing that I'd like to mention is that we're continuing to increase our IT security capabilities, and we've hired a number of individuals to assist us with IT security related issues, compliance issues, risk management issues. We're also in the process of conducting or preparing for an exercise on our disaster recovery plans. And so that is scheduled in January, mid-January. So we've been working on that now for about 3 months. And in addition to doing the disaster recovery, we're also running at the same time our business continuity plans. We're going to be doing tabletop exercises with everybody that is required to be there in order for us to test some of our systems and identify some gaps that we may need moving forward. So that is something that I think is important for you all to know. The other is I want to thank the board members and some of the trustees that provided input on the job bulletin for the chief deputy position. I saw a version, a nearly final version of that on Friday, and we're in the process of fine tuning it. We have implemented a lot of the ideas and attributes and skill sets that some of the board members has asked us to make sure that we we include in the bulletin, and so that'll be moving forward. I'm hopeful to get that bulletin out by the end of the week. So we look forward, quite frankly, this next year to work with all of the trustees, Mr. Bernstein as the chair, Ms. Gray as the vice chair, moving forward. And so I am more than happy to stand for any questions that you may have at this point.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments?
I have one, Mr. Bernstein.
Yes, is that Mr. Robbins?
Regarding the call center, Mr. Santos, were you referring to the fact that will the call center now be open on weekends? I was a little unclear to me what you were saying is going to change.
Yes, the call centers for our members, as well as our retiree healthcare call center, will be open for our members on the weekend, half-day Saturdays for the next 3 weeks.
So just on Saturday?
Yes, just on Saturdays. At
Okay,
this point, we'll adjust as we go, make sure that we're able to process all the applications. But at this point, we think half a day on Saturday is sufficient. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you, Mr. Kryman. We'll move on to item 6, consent items, which is the ratification of service retirement and survivor benefit application approvals. There's a memo dated December 28th, 2020.
Motion Pryor.
I will second it.
I second it, yeah.
I'll be happy to give Mr. Oakham the second. Bonnie, would you please take the roll call?
Thank you, Mr. Knox.
Aye.
Mr. Santos,
Aye.
Ms. Gray,
Aye.
Mr. Oakham,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Kehoe,
Aye.
Mr. Robbins,
Aye.
Ms. Zapanta,
Yes.
Chair Bernstein.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. We are now on to item 7, reports. Our first, A, is a presentation on state and federal legislative updates by several experts. So I will turn it over to you, Mr. Liu, and let you take it away.
Great, thank you, Chair Bernstein. Good morning and congratulations to you, Ms. Gray and Ms. Zapanta, and good morning, trustees. So normally we will have an offsite on January to have our legislative activists come in to give us an update. As you know, the pandemic has sort of upended everyone's schedules, but it was important to have them come this month to give us an update for just a really tumultuous year in 2020 due to the pandemic, as well as a presidential election that just happened. So the plan is we'll have Mr. Ackler and Mr. Padron first give us a state update, and then Mr. Rhoda and Mr. Doucet give us a federal update. And also during their question and answer periods, I understand that the board members or the trustees have had questions or ideas about future presentations. So feel free to give any suggestions for future presentations that we can formulate. But with that, I'll hand it over to Joe and Naomi.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. It's always a pleasure to be with you. We were asked to give you an update on the elections and statewide, and also to give you some insights on the politics in Sacramento. And in addition to that, we've been asked to give you an update on the vaccine rollout from the Newsom administration, and look at an overview of the COVID-related bills that have been introduced. Alex, go to the first slide. Or second slide, please, Alex. The November election, we had a record turnout, as you can imagine. In fact, we set state records. The registered voters in November were at 22 million, which is a state record, and the voter turnout was 17,785,000, which was another record, and that was 80% of the registered voters came out to vote. And the other interesting statistic in the turnout was that statewide we did mail-in ballots. 15.5 million people voted by mail. So it was quite a historic vote in November. As far as the state Senate, we had not significant change, but we have the Republicans lost 2 seats, interesting enough, and that increased the Democrat supermajority to 31-9 in that 40-member House. In the Senate, we have 8 new senators. 6 of them are because 6 senators were turned out and replaced. And then 2 of them were the 2 Republican seats that the Republicans lost in Orange County. Senator Morlock and Senator Chang were defeated by the 2 Democrats. So the incumbent Republicans lost 2 seats in Orange County, which is very interesting. Orange County is moving that way. In the state assembly, Republicans, interesting enough, gained 1 seat. But in that 80-member House, it's still a supermajority for the Democrats. We have 60 Democrats, 19 Republicans, and 1 independent. And in the Assembly, we have 10 new members, and that was just a matter of people moving around, running for different offices. But it's both houses are very much supermajority Democrats, and very similar to what we've dealt with over the last 2 years. As far as our leadership in the legislature, it's staying the same. The Assembly reelected Speaker Anthony Rendon to be the Speaker. He's from Long Beach, Lakewood specifically. He's a good speaker. He's dealt with us well, and we appreciate having him there. And in the Senate, the President of the Senate was reelected, Senator Tony Atkins from San Diego, who also is doing a good job. The minority leaders, Republican leaders, stayed the same. Shannon Grove, Senator Grove from Bakersfield, and Marie Waldron from Escondido are the 2 Republican leaders in the legislature.
Thanks, Joe. I'll go over the proposition now really quickly. In November, California voters weighed in on 12 statewide measures in areas of criminal justice, rent control. We had some privacy laws, things dealing with affirmative action on the ballot. I'm happy to go through each individually if there are any questions, but overall 7 out of the 12 failed. And if there are no questions, I'll just go to the next slide, Alex.
I have a question.
Sure.
I have a question. If you can explain Prop 19 and the efforts to either clean up or I don't know what they're going to do to fix it.
Prop 19. So
Yes.
that was the change in property tax laws. And basically, I'm not sure what efforts are being made in terms of fixing it, but I can definitely go over what was done. So it allows for homeowners who are 55 or older, disabled, or wildfire victims to basically transfer the primary tax base to a replacement home. And in many cases allows them to kind of have that same lower tax payment. And then it also tightens the rules around folks getting like the lower tax rate for inherited property. So those taxes would be adjusted to the market rate if the inherited home isn't used as a primary residence. Interestingly enough, while it was approved this time around, voters in 2018 rejected a similar initiative.
That's the problem where I said, are they going to fix it? I understand that there is a lot of turmoil among the state assessors, the property and tax assessors, because of the fact that there will be no generational wealth paths down. Basically, people who have had homes for, in their families for years will not be able to maintain them at the lower tax base. is there going to be a cleanup of that issue?
Thus far, I have not heard of anything or seen any bills introduced on that issue, but happy to follow up if something like that should be introduced.
My understanding is that a lot of the lobbyists are trying to focus on that particular issue of the proposition to clean it up. Just in conversation with the state association of tax assessors, I understand that they are lobbying to at least clean it up and figure out what to do next.
Mr. Bernstein, may I?
Yes, please, Mr. Santos. And if anyone wants to get in queue, just throw yourself into chat and I'll be happy to call on you in order.
Yeah, I agree with Ms. Gray. I think it is horrendous that we are transferred a higher tax rate to children. It is outrageous. I mean, our children today are not able to buy real estate in the state because it's so expensive. And this new regulation is going to impact the members tremendously. And we should do everything that we can to clean it up because it's outrageous. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Sun.
Alan, I have a question of, let's see, it's Naomi, yeah. I understand, and maybe we need to get our tax assessor out here to explain this proposition. I understand if the family, the children are living in the home, okay, for 2 years, when a death occurs, primary home, there will not be a tax increase. Is that correct, Naomi?
That is correct. So if it's used as a primary residence, then that tax property tax increase would not go into effect. So yes, your characterization is accurate. And then just to provide a little bit sort of background in terms of, so yeah, I know that the California Realtors Association, the firefighters, the Democratic Party, and then the nurses were, in support. And then you had the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association kind of on the other side. So you're right in saying, there are a lot of interest groups that have kind of weighed in on this issue, on both sides. So very much there possibly could be something to come out of this.
Yeah, but that would have to be another proposition. I don't think the legislature could change that proposition. Is that correct?
That's accurate. So it would have to be another proposition, or the legislature would have to introduce legislation to put something on the ballot, right? So it wouldn't necessarily have to be put on the ballot through initiative and signature collection, but voters would have to weigh in.
Naomi, was this, so if children are living in a house for 2 years with parents, that gets waived. Now a second home does not fall into that. Second home will be increased in valuation. Is that correct for property tax purposes?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, and then you can do this 3 times above age 55 rather than just once?
I'm sorry, Joe may be able to weigh in on that. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think that's existing tax law, but we'd have to check that for you.
Yeah, okay.
All right, Mr. Kryman is in the queue.
Yes, so I have a little experience in this particular area. So Prop 19, there's a couple of things that I wanted to make sure that I highlighted for you. So the tax base, if the property is inherited, a primary residence can go to the children and it would still receive the same tax base, but the child has to live on the property for 2 years. So it's not that they're living there 2 years prior. Once there's a death and they inherit the property, that tax base can go to the children, but they have to live on the premises. So the other thing,
after the death, death, Santos? Yeah, okay.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
They have to live there. So that's a change. The other is the second home. The way the current law reads is that the primary residence can go to, it can be transferred over to a child or and still retain the lower tax base. You had also another provision where up to $1 million in additional property can also retain the tax base if you gave that property to your children. So for example, if you owned your primary residence and you passed away and you left it to your children, your current tax base would be maintained. If you had an apartment complex, for example, that was for $1 million, you can also transfer that tax base to your child and the tax base would not go up. So in this particular instance, they're removing that $1 million limit for the second portion or for a second property that you can transfer, a third property up to $1 million to your child. So that's where we have the issue about not being able to pass on your wealth to your children moving forward. The other thing that I really want to stress is that the new law goes into effect on February 15th. So if any of you all are considering transferring the property and maintaining that tax base, you have to do it under the old laws as of February 15th. Once February 15th comes, there's no longer a parent-child exclusion that's attached to second home properties or other properties. So just keep that in mind. And of course, you should always consult with your accountants and your estate planners to make sure that you take advantage of the current laws and any future laws. So I just wanted to make sure that we're aware of that deadline.
Well, I would just add to that, and thank you, Santos, that this would seem like an issue of great interest to any number of our members. So I don't know if it's a LACERA thing or perhaps RELAC, but I hope somebody will get out some user-friendly information to our members on what these changes are and how they might impact your ownership and inheritance rights.
Yeah, Chair Bernstein, we will work with the assessor's office. I know that they're working on a campaign to educate all the taxpayers, property owners. And so what we can do is piggyback on their information and maybe provide a link to our members, and we can send out an email blast as well sooner rather than later. So we'll do that as soon as we can.
I would hope we would do that. Thank you.
Chair Bernstein, that was a very good question. It does affect our members because it is our members who are these property owners, and the way they are maintaining their mortgage payments, their property taxes, is with the benefits that we pay them. So we've got to make them able to not only receive the benefit, but be able to maintain that benefit here in California.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. An excellent point. Any other comments or questions about this part of the presentation? We do have some more. Naomi, thank you very much. I don't know if you're done or if you have anything more you wanted to add.
Nothing more on the propositions. Happy to move to the third slide.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So here I'll talk a little bit about Governor Newsom as well as some of the COVID-19 response. So the governor has been providing regular COVID-19 updates regarding what the state is doing to address the pandemic. So those are normally streamed online or sometimes even televised right around noon, and they're periodic, I would say once to about 3 times a week. The state has also consistently updated their COVID-19 website, so covid19.ca.gov. There you can find some of the newest initiatives as well as the latest data in terms of cases, deaths, and tests. Currently, because of the uptake in COVID-19 cases, much of the state is under what is being referred to as a regional stay-at-home order. So about 47 out of the 58 counties are under the order. The regional stay-at-home order is based on ICU data from 4 regions, or on ICU data. So 4 of the regions, San Joaquin Valley, Southern California, Greater Sacramento, as well as the Bay Area, are all under the stay-at-home region. And the only area that isn't is the Northern California region. The way that it works is that once a region's 4-week ICU projection shows a capacity of greater than or equal to 15%, the order will be lifted in that area. The ICU projections are calculated eligible to be out of the order. Another big focus of the governor has been the vaccine distribution. So to ensure that the vaccine is distributed and allocated equitably, California has created basically 2 working groups, a drafting guidelines work group charged with developing California specific guidance for prioritization as well as allocation of the vaccine while supplies are limited. And then we also have what is known as the Community Advisory Vaccine Committee, which is meant to provide input and feedback to the planning efforts and basically kind of solve the barriers of inequity that may exist as decisions are being made in terms of who gets the vaccine and in what sort of phase. Currently, the state is in what's being referred to as phase 1A of the vaccine distribution, which includes healthcare workers as well as long-term care residents. After healthcare workers and long-term care residents, the state has said that they want to vaccinate individuals who have a higher risk for severe disease or death due to age or other factors. And then after that, it'll be folks who are unable to work from home or live in geographic areas that have been highly impacted or who are most likely to spread the disease to other workers of the public. And so again, here, I'm happy to go into kind of further details as it pertains to exactly which individuals are in each phase, but I don't want to, take up too much time by going through each one. But if there are questions, happy to answer them. Also, the next meeting that, obviously this is an ongoing kind of process. The next meeting of the advisory committee is actually slated for later today from 3 to 6 to discuss the phase 1B and 1C rollout and authorization of that vaccine administration for that portion. On Monday, the governor reported that thus far, California has received about 1.2 doses of the vaccine. Of those, only about 400,000 doses have been administered as of 1/3. I'll next kind of move on to the next little bullet point about, some of the bad publicity the governor has received and some of his staff exits. So the governor has come under fire because of some of his responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, there are folks that, are sort of unhappy when their businesses are shut down or if they're not considered essential. But I think what happened and kind of when this all came to a head was in November, when the governor attended a dinner at the French Laundry in Napa to celebrate the 50th birthday of one of his longtime friends, Jason Kinney. Mr. Kinney, however, is also a political advisor to Newsom and a partner in a lobbying firm. And so when that news broke, the governor received, just a ton of backlash, and he has since offered an apology, but folks that are upset with how he has handled the pandemic have highlighted not only the potential, hypocrisy in some of this, but also just, been really quick to call the governor out on maybe some elitism because the French Laundry is a rather upscale restaurant in Napa. Amid some of that criticism, one of the things that his administration did was issue a memo instituting what they're calling a lobbying ban. So effective immediately, any of his, paid campaign or political consultants shall be barred from directly communicating on behalf of the client to the governor. That was, sort of received fairly well, but I'm not sure that that's sort of addressed everyone's critique of what the governor did. I also kind of wanted to talk about some staff exits, and probably the biggest one is his chief of staff, Ann O'Leary, will be departing her post. And then the governor subsequently announced that Jim DeBoo, a veteran Democratic political consultant, started January 1st, and he's going to be kind of leading the governor's office alongside the cabinet secretary, Ana Montesantos, who's been there for some time. Here again, we did see a little bit of negative attention the governor received in his selection of Jim DeBoo, because Jim is a registered lobbyist. And so again, people there sort of raised the issue of, unfair influence. And I'll kick it off to Joe to speak a little bit more about the recall.
Yeah, thank you, Naomi. As you can imagine, with all this negativity in the governor's office, he also has to deal with a recall that I'm sure that all of you have been reading about. And the recall has gotten some legs because of the bad publicity, and also because recently a donor from Orange County put $500,000 towards gathering signatures. The facts are that the recall so far has somewhere between 700 and 900,000 signatures that they're turning in. And you have to have 1.5 million signatures, authorized signatures that are valid to put the recall on the ballot. So the timing is such that this recall has to have all of its authorized signatures in by March 17th. So they only have about no more than 2 months to get this done. And if you have, the way that signature gathering works, if you have anywhere between 700 and 900,000 that you're turning in now, usually about 50% of them aren't authentic or you can't use them. So they have a long way to go. And a lot of publicity you may be reading about this recall is that it's really on track. It definitely is on track, but they're still going to have, they've raised 500,000 recently, but they're still going to have to raise 3 million or more to get the rest of the signatures they need between now and March 17th. So basically they need about 2 million more signatures to make this thing happen by March 17th. And that's quite an uphill battle, but it's possible. So if we had to predict it now, we'd say right now it's 50-50. But as you read about it and hear about it in the media, I think it sounds like more than 50-50. The other interesting thing about this, now that the governor is challenged with a recall, he can open up a fund, a campaign that has unlimited resources that he can raise to try to offset it. And he may do that to put out some information about what is good that is happening, not just the bad things that people are hearing about. If it does come to fruition, and somehow would qualify for the ballot, it would probably be late summer, maybe this fall. And there's 2 Republicans, John Cox, that ran against Gavin Newsom before, and Kevin Faulconer, the former mayor of San Diego, just this week opened up an exploratory committee for governor. So he'd be very interested in running for that too. But the recall looks unlikely, but it definitely has some legs under it, and we'll have to stay on top of it. I just wanted to give you that update. And as far as appointments, I'm sure you've seen a lot of this in the media lately, but as you know, Kamala Harris will be leaving the U.S. Senate to take over as vice president. And the governor appointed our Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, to replace her. Alex is a top-notch guy. He'll be a wonderful U.S. Senator, very bright guy. And I think the state will be proud of him. To replace him as Secretary of State, the governor got a lot of criticism from the Black Caucus for not replacing Kamala Harris with a African American. So what he did do is put Assemblywoman Shirley Weber, an African American Assemblywoman from San Diego, and appoint her Secretary of State. So that was a good move. Shirley Weber is a wonderful lady, will do a good job as Secretary of State. The really rare position the governor's been in, he technically now has three positions, statewide offices that he could appoint. And the third one is our Attorney General, Xavier Becerra. As you know, he's been identified by President-elect Biden to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services at the federal level. That appointment still may not be approved by the Senate, but the way things are looking, it probably will, but there is a chance it won't. If he does become the new Secretary of Health and Human Services, then the Attorney General's position is open. And that is a real plum for statewide office and for aggressive politicians. And there's a lot of names for that, but basically we think that if the governor does appoint someone, Attorney General will be one of 3 members in the state assembly. They're Rob Bonta from Oakland, David Chu from San Francisco, or Lorena Gonzalez from San Diego. Any questions? Next slide, Alex. Moving on to the state budget. Constitutionally, the governor has to present the budget by January 10th. He's already announced that he's going to present the budget this Friday, January 8th. The good news with the budget is that there's a projected surplus of $26 billion. This is very, very helpful, obviously, this time. It's a real windfall that wasn't expected to be this high. And it may change a little bit, but it's right around in the $26 billion range. And the governor has already announced a lot of things that he plans to do and announce on Friday. And I'll let Naomi talk about some of them.
Apologize, I believe I was on mute. The governor has already announced that he wants to direct about $2 billion for the safe reopening of schools beginning in February. So that would be immediate funds that he wants from the legislature to approve. Further, still along the same lines of schools, he has sort of hinted at allocating additional funds to combat learning loss, things like funding summer school programs, potentially, longer school days and even some tutoring. Additionally, the governor has previewed that he plans to propose about $300+ million for vaccines. This is on items such as information technology and California's CalVax end-to-end vaccine management system. Then some of that money would be for logistics and commodities. So things like transportation containers, dry ice, freezers, and then also on a public education campaign just to raise awareness about the vaccine and, the benefits to taking it. Yesterday, the governor also made some additional details public, saying that he will propose about $4.5 billion for equitable and for the equitable recovery of California's businesses and as well as for job creation. So included in that is money for workforce development, for housing, for small business grants, and then things like tax credits, California Competes, things like that to help retain jobs in California. The governor for a long time has also made homelessness a priority, and he's hinted again at continuing to make that something that he is wanting to focus and hone in on. Finally, based on past approaches, it's likely that we'll see the governor put any sort of windfall possible into some reserves.
Yeah, and in talking to our plan sponsor, LA County, and some of their lobbyists this week, one of the things they're really hopeful for is, as Naomi pointed out, additional money to help with getting out the vaccines. That $300 million towards that will be very helpful. As far as future predictions, the Legislative Analyst's Office is saying we have this windfall of $26 billion this year, but they're expecting next year and the following year that the state will have some sort of a deficit, anywhere from around the $10 billion mark. And it all depends on how quick the economy comes back. Now, in that vein, the UCLA Anderson forecast, which most people look at to predict the California economy, they are much more optimistic about the second half of 2021 and 2022 as far as the economy bouncing back in California. If that comes true, maybe the deficits that we Legislative Analyst's Office is pointing out now for next year and the following year may not come to be. We'll have to wait and see. Alex, the next slide, please. Now, the 2021 legislature, we're here. They're going to reconvene on Monday, January 11th. They pushed it back a week due to COVID circumstances. But they'll now be here on Monday and get the session going. As far as bill introductions, that's all happening right now. But there's two things I wanted to point out to you. I know you'd be interested in. One is in talking to the public employee staffs, the committee staffs. They're expecting some divestiture bills this year. We've seen these in the past. These divestiture bills of pension investments. Now, normally when those bills are introduced, they only deal with CalPERS and CalSTRS and the UC faculty retirement pensions. But sometimes, or possibly, they could pull in the 37 Act counties. We will keep an eye on that, but I wanted you to be aware of that there are some divestiture bills that will definitely be introduced this session. We'll be on top of them, keep you all informed. And sometimes, even if it's just CalPERS or CalSTRS, that momentum does sort of gravitate down to the counties. Another thing I know you'd be very interested in fact, I believe some of you are already aware of it, is that there will be a COVID presumption bill introduced this session. It's still forming. The public employees unions are coming together and trying to form a coalition. But there definitely is going to be a COVID presumption bill that we talked about this summer that we thought would be something fair and should get done. And it is going to be introduced this session and happen. And it'll really track the workers' compensation presumption bill that was passed and be along the similar lines. So that's good news. Now, there's a number of COVID bills that have been introduced already, and Naomi will just give you an overview of those so you have a feel.
Sure. Thanks, Joe. So over 30 COVID-related bills have been introduced, and I believe we can expect more. The legislature kind of has touched on things ranging from employee protection. So that includes, how will contact tracing be done and where will, privacy fall into that discussion? How will employers roll out testing and who will pay for the testing? Where are we going to get PPE from? So those types of things. Then you also have a subset of bills dealing with tenant protections, evictions, moratoriums, those types of things, deferred mortgage payments and how that will be handled. We've got a host of bills focused on EDD issues. So some folks, obviously are out of work because of the pandemic and are having to look for unemployment benefits. And so that system has been overwhelmed, slow to get out some of those benefits. And then even just prior to the pandemic, there were issues of modernization that probably needed to be addressed. And so those have only that could potentially help our small businesses while they look to recover. Then finally, you do have some Republican members introducing legislation to push back a little on the governor. So things like saying, his administration cannot take away licenses, say that ABC cannot take away the license of a bar if for whatever reason they are open or not completely abiding by the COVID-19 laws. Those bills I don't anticipate go anywhere, but I thought we would still highlight them.
Thanks, Naomi. We just wanted to point out to you too that the two public employees committees that we deal with and all of our stuff moves through in the Capitol have new chairs this session. The Assembly Committee has Assemblyman Jim Cooper from Sacramento. He's a former lieutenant in the Sheriff's Department, a great guy. We're very close to him. We're looking forward to working with him, and we think we'll find him very helpful. And then in the Senate, the freshman senator, Senator Dave Cortese from San Jose, is going to be the chairman of the Senate Public Employees Committee. And he has a long track record with public employees and an understanding of pensions. So we're very lucky to have him there. And then finally, we just thought we'd just explain to you this whole COVID capital situation and the interaction and the way it's operating. This whole past session, even if Naomi and I wanted to go in to testify on a bill, we had telephoned it in. If we can make the case that we should be there in person, we would go into the building. A CHP officer would escort us to the committee room, wait until we were done testifying, then escort us out of the building. So they're being very tight about who they let in and out of the building. They don't want people moving around. Each legislator in his office is only allowed to have one staffer there during the day. So it's very buttoned down. They're very conscientious about it. And it's amazing how well it worked. It surprised Naomi and I that we were able to get things done. We worked very well with the staff and the members, and it wasn't as horrible as it sounds, but it was very different.
Absolutely, Joe. I would agree with you. I think that you know, relationships became more important than ever. Being able to, you know, email a staffer that you knew or send them a quick text if something needed to, you know, you needed some information. I did just want to kind of highlight some of what Joe was saying in terms of the impact that COVID-19 has had, not only, you know, just around Sacramento, but also specifically within the Capitol community. On Monday, it became public that an employee that worked in the Capitol for over 40 years passed away because of COVID-19. It wasn't a legislative staffer, but it was, again, someone who had been sort of a fixture within the Capitol community. So obviously our condolences go out to the family and the broader Capitol community. Since December 7th, more than a dozen employees who have worked in the Capitol have tested positive. And so, like Joe mentioned, there is a push for employees to stay home if possible, and for folks to only enter the building if absolutely necessary.
Thanks, Naomi. Alex, next slide, I guess, please. That's our presentation. Apologize for it going so long, but we're glad to take your questions. Hopefully we helped out, and we'd be glad to take any more questions now if necessary.
Joe, Naomi, interesting stuff. Thank you very much. I believe Mr. Robbins had a question or a comment.
Well, I wanted to make a comment, but it wasn't regarding this report. It was just at the end of Alex's report. I wanted to bring an issue regarding the pension offset WEP issue, which I was made aware of on Monday of this week.
So you want to wait till later?
I can, yeah.
Okay. Then are there any other questions for Joe and Naomi before we move on to the federal part? Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Tony, I think you're up.
Thank you, Alan, and Happy New Year to everyone. It's nice to see your faces. Congratulations, Alan, on the re-election, and to the other officers. I'm going to apologize in advance because as Joe and Naomi were talking, my signal grew a little weak at times. So I'm going to keep my eyes on Alan. If he waves his hands, I'll just stop talking because you probably won't be able to hear me at that point. Alex, let's go to the first slide. Second slide, I mean. Thank you. We all read every day about the presidency, the election. There's nothing new to add except today is a very momentous day in Washington, and the Congress is counting the electoral votes. It started, the joint session started just a couple of minutes ago at 1 p.m. our time. The counting of the votes, no one is giving any credence to the objections that will be raised, at least on the counts in 3 states, Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, although they will have to go through the motions and consider the motions to reject, which could take a very long time. It could well go into tomorrow, could go overnight, past midnight, but no one believes it will affect the results or can constitutionally affect the results. The inauguration will be on the 20th, a very different type of inauguration than what we're used to. And I think Shane might add some things on that because it's been logistically a little difficult to plan, but the National Guard has been involved in some of that planning.
Yeah, so I'll
go-
actually, it's
Yeah.
going to be a very scaled back inauguration. It's going to be a virtual inauguration. And currently only members of Congress plus one other guest that they can bring will be allowed to actually attend in person, Tony. So very, very scaled back. And I only heard of like one inaugural ball as well, and trying to, respect DC's protocols with COVID. So.
Absolutely. Alex, we could go to the next slide. So the Senate, these slides were prepared some weeks ago. So we saw the Georgia elections yesterday. If the numbers hold on the Purdue Ossoff race, then it will stand at 50-50. Kelly Loeffler looks to have been defeated, and that race has been called by Raphael Warnock. And so what you're going to have is a 50-50 split with the vice president after January 20th, Kamala Harris, being able to cast the deciding vote, but more importantly, in that position, make it possible for the Democrats to organize the Senate so that Chuck Schumer of New York would be the majority leader. There would be Democratic committee chairs, and the majority leader, Schumer, would be able to control the agenda on the Senate floor. So we will, of course, wait for final results as we must from Georgia, but that looks the way it's trending at the moment. You can go to the next slide, Alex. And of course, Joe talked about Alex Padilla, and we think that's a terrific choice. We look forward to working with him, and we'll definitely, once it's possible to do so and he has staff in place, we'll definitely make those relationships on behalf of LACERA. Go ahead, Alex, to the next. Yeah, very tight margin in the House, as you've read. There's still 3 outstanding races. Even though this was done weeks ago, there's still 3 outstanding races that are in a recount. But the Democrats have the majority, very narrow, for the 117th Congress in the House. And you saw Speaker Pelosi being reelected to that position just last week. Go ahead, Alex. And strangely, and Joe gave us a strange situation too with Orange County, but despite the overwhelming victory in California by Joe Biden, 3 House seats were flipped back to Republicans, and those were tough seats. They were very much, on the margin seats, and they could well flip again in 2 years or in 4 years. But as you see below, on the House side, the Republicans were able to regain some ground in the U.S. House. And go ahead, Alex. But despite that, overwhelming numbers in the House for the California delegation, 42 of 53. And then, ironically, maybe, both party leaders in the House are from California with diametrically visions of the nation and quite different ideological background and beliefs. So very interesting situation there, but California, again, showing a tremendous prominence at the national level. So I'm going to stop with this general election discussion and let Shane add anything to that, and then I'll go back and do the retirement issues.
Thanks, Tony. So obviously, Georgia today, and if Ossoff were able to prevail in the Senate, we'll see us split. And in my healthcare presentation, I'm going to follow kind of along the lines and maybe talk to you about what we can now expect if we do have a Democrat Senate, because there would be some opportunities to do certain things. So I'll stop there and I'll touch on that later on the healthcare side.
Very good. Thanks, Shane. Alex, you could go to the next slide. First up is going to be consideration of another COVID relief package. On the table in the last couple of weeks in a high profile way is increasing the amount of direct payments to $2,000, which the Democrats and some Republicans in Congress want to do. I think that has real life if the Georgia numbers hold, particularly, and there's a Democratic Senate. Aid to state and local, territorial, tribal governments was put on the back burner because there wasn't bipartisan agreement on how to proceed. That issue was tied by Senate Leader McConnell to a liability waiver for employers, which is not an outrageous idea if it could be fashioned in a way that made sense and did not invite bad behavior on the part of employers. I mean, I think there are quite a few Democrats who would be willing to, for a limited period of time, provide some liability waiver for employers, and these would be employers in the private and public sector. So we'll see this probably soon after the inauguration. We'll hear a lot about it leading up to the inauguration, but COVID relief is going to continue to be a prime issue. I will add one other element to this. The language we have seen on additional aid to state and local carried with it restrictive language on public pensions. Two parts. One was just you can't take the check from the federal government, turn around and deposit it into your trust fund. I don't think anyone was contemplating ever doing that. But the most recent piece of language we saw also included the second part, which said you can take money from the federal government, state or local, but you have to agree to not make any changes to your pension benefits in the period of time. I think it's a 2-year period of time, with a baseline of what was the state of benefits in 2019. That is, I think, a very problematic provision. The national groups have been focusing on it. If there is renewed, and I think there will be, push for federal aid to state and local governments, we're going to have to deal with that issue, and I'll be certain to get you the latest language and discuss it with LACERA. Go ahead, Alex, to the next. Yeah, those are the three pieces of legislation. The last one being, let me say it this way, HR 8696 is very comprehensive. It's mostly defined contribution-based provisions, not defined benefit provisions. S1431 is about 3/4 of the House bill, and S5064 is the other quarter. So what you have is legislation on both sides of the Congress as it ended on January 2nd to provide additional incentives for saving on DC plans. So let me go then to the next slide. There is a provision that we should be very mindful of, and I'm sure you hear a lot about it from members, and it's the required minimum distribution age trigger. So Congress moved this age trigger at the end of 2019 from age 70 and 1/2 to age 72. That does not seem to be sufficient in the eyes of members of Congress at this moment. So there is a strong push to move this age trigger to age 75. And in the House bill, there was an exemption if you aggregate all your DC plans, IRAs. If you're 100K or less, then you wouldn't be affected by the RMD rules at all. Very interesting. And then there's also a provision in the House bill on disability payments to first responders and excluding disability payments from income. Go to the next slide, please, Alex. So in the parallel Senate bill, you see that again, the RMD question's on the table. The age 75 is on the table, but this is a much less aggressive timeline. The House would have done it on that particular piece of legislation in 2021. This is not till 2029. I think there's a fair chance if there is a retirement legislation that the RMD age trigger will be moved in some period, and it would be effective somewhere between 21 and 29. And there's also been some discussion on RMDs. Congressman Kevin Brady, who's the senior Republican on the Ways and Means Committee in the House, has said openly that maybe we don't need an age trigger at all. Maybe folks should just be able to take distributions when they would like to take distributions and need to do so. So we'll see if that really captures any traction, gets any traction. You know, these are retirement accounts, and they've been tax deferred savings. So the Treasury Department's in previous administration had said, well, you know, we want some certainty that this money is actually going to be taxed, that there will be distributions that we've deferred the tax on. And we also would like to reinforce that these are retirement accounts and not estate planning tools. So this will be a debate. I think the think tanks will jump on this. There'll be a lot said about it. So I wanted to flag that for you. Alex, you could go to the next. And the Biden administration, you know, in his campaign materials, there's no legislative language on this, but President-elect Biden has talked a great deal about trying to equalize the savings incentives across income ranges. And right now, there is a greater incentive for higher earners to set money aside in these tax deferred accounts. Now, what he has talked about is would be a complete transformation of how the savings is done with a tax credit set at a flat rate of 26%. Most observers, and I tend to agree, do not think that this is going to take off, but that there will be instead some type of further incentive for lower income earners to set some money aside for retirement. So I think that Vice President-elect Biden's headed down a road that has merit, but I think this initial, you know, description is probably not what we see come to be the law. Go ahead, Alex. And I should be getting close to the end. So LACERA took a strong position on making changes to the HELPS provision. And the HELPS provision is the annual exclusion from income for retired first responders of $3,000 if the money goes directly from LACERA to the retiree's health or long-term care provider. And this LACERA and other public plans being in the middle has caused a lot of administrative headaches, heartburn. You'd rather do without it. A lot of plans would rather do without being in the middle of this. So there is federal legislation on that, and that we expect to certainly push for again, and there will be retirement vehicles to look at that. On HELPS, there was also legislation to double the annual exclusion from $3,000 to $6,000. So we'll see where that goes. The International Association of Firefighters is strongly pushing both changes. We are working closely with them on that, and the Fraternal Order of Police and NAPO as well on the law enforcement side. The second bullet, and I'm going to go through these bullets with the information so we can kind of pass through the next couple of slides. The age 50 Medicare buy-in, Shane's going to get into a whole myriad of Medicare for all down to other options and the public option and different proposals that are out there. This is one proposal dealing again with retired first responders. The feeling was these folks are retiring at very young ages, well before the Medicare trigger of 65 or eligibility of 65. And they could use a bridge in between their employer's plan to Medicare. So this was introduced by Sherrod Brown of Ohio and Tom Malinowski of New Jersey. So we'll look and follow that closely. And Les had a question on WEP. So I will just give you the quick update is, there's been legislation to repeal both WEP and the government pension offset, which are penalties on Social Security benefits if you're eligible for a pension based on non-Social Security earnings, such as many public employees are. There'll be pushes to repeal both. There'll be pushes to modify WEP, and I know we're going to be very involved on behalf of LACERA on that issue.
Tony, if I may comment, then I'll just jump in right now if I can, Alan.
Absolutely,
I just read on Monday that apparently President Biden is in favor of eliminating the WEP pension offset. So I don't have any details on that, but I did read an article in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was, but that's interesting news. Unfortunately, as you know, Tony, all of the previous legislation appears to have been prospective only. So, and I know the international firefighters are not in favor of the repeal, and their parent organizations have always been, NCPERS has always been opposed to it. So I don't know if there'll be any changes there, but certainly among our retirees, that is and will continue to be a compelling issue. That's all.
Thank you, Les. No, I think there's going to be a pretty strong push on repeal. My concern with it going forward, it being repealed, is that it gets lumped into a broader reform of Social Security, which talks about, levels of FICA taxes and benefits, and that could bog down. I think there's a lot of political support for doing something on WEP. So, it's something that we will certainly work on, Les. Thank you for the comments. And then I will add one bullet that's not there, and that's infrastructure. And you might see infrastructure quite early because it's part of the mindset of the incoming Biden administration to stimulate the economy, and how better to do so than with a massive infrastructure legislation and projects around the country. So there have been discussions over the years about trying to, in some way, incentivize public pension plans to do more on infrastructure investing. And some of those have, been bond related, where a new bond would be created that would be over the Treasury yield. So that would be attractive to investors like public pensions, other pensions. There have been various loan programs put forward. So I would just put this on your radar that if infrastructure starts to move, we might see some interest among Congress in trying to move public pensions more toward that, which we may end up resisting depending on how it's designed. And Alex, if you could skip forward 4 slides. And that's it for me on my part. We're going to see, we may see renewed interest. I'll go to that second bullet. That's the financial transactions tax. And it is what it sounds like, a very minor tax on financial transactions in the marketplace, which would be started small. The concern is that it would grow over time. The concern on the part of entities like LACERA is that not only would it grow, but it would be passed on to them through fees that they pay to the investment community. So the FTT is something that we look at very closely. I do not believe it's going to get a lot of traction in this upcoming Congress. UBIT is another, that's the unrelated business income tax. And Congress attempted to place all public pension plans under UBIT in the tax bill in 2017, which we beat back and did pass the House, however. So it was a serious issue that would have been real dollars for pension plans. I'll jump back to that first bullet. PEPTA is the Public Employee Pension Transparency Act. It's a disclosure act. You'd have to restate your unfunded liabilities based on a Treasury bond rate. But I know under California law, you're already having to restate your liabilities. PEPTA might not be such a huge change for you, but it would be for other plans, and the plan community definitely opposes it. And then this push toward Rothification. So no more traditional IRAs, no more traditional 457Bs. Everything would be a Roth, so that the taxes would be paid up front. The Treasury would get the taxes, and the money would come into the budget window early. This really is just moving money around. I don't know that there's going to be a large appetite for that. So with that, let me turn to Shane, and thank you for your attention.
Next slide, please, Alex. Thank you, Tony, and it's good to be with everyone. I too want to wish LACERA a happy, healthy, and productive 2021. What I wanted to do in regards to the healthcare portion is sort of catch everybody up to speed, what we just saw from last year, and what I would anticipate would be some market changes. And then towards the end, talk to you about what we could expect to see in healthcare as it relates to this year and the new 117th Congress. So with that, Tony sort of hit a little bit on the most recent COVID stimulus package that Congress voted right before they got out for Christmas. It was about 5,593 pages. I'm up to page 2,221 right now of the bill, and it's fascinating reading. But I will just highlight quick summaries for you as it relates to some of the things that we were talking about in COVID, which is it provided about $900 billion in additional stimulus funds. You saw also $600 in direct payments, and Congress is entertaining trying to go up more to 2,000. About 30 billion was included for vaccine distribution. I did go through and look at certain things that might be relevant to us, and there were some tweaks that were done for Part A and B for enrollment period, for example, for traditional Medicare, fee-for-service Medicare, that may impact some of our members that were displaced because of wildfires or COVID or other things like that in it. So these are just some of the provisions that were tucked into the COVID bill that Congress was able to do on a bipartisan basis. I'm going to talk to you about a bigger piece of that, which was the surprise medical billing in another slide. Next slide, please. So one of the things that was enacted, not through legislation, but through rules and regs, was President Trump introduced a rule called the hospital price transparency in the last Congress, and that will go into effect starting next year. And basically what that does is it requires all hospitals to provide the cost of charges and services that they provide in a format that can be understood by HHS and consumers. This is a means to try to address price transparency. This issue was fought by the hospital associations. The American Hospital Association went into litigation, and they lost in the appellate circuit. And so now this rule will go in, and will it have a major impact on things? No, hospitals just normally don't want to show kind of the negotiated rates that they do with health insurers, but I wanted you to be aware that this is a rule that actually will go into to effect this year. Next slide, please. So surprise medical billing. You've seen the debate unfold the last 2 years in this Congress, and there were bipartisan approaches to do this. The bottom line, if you were to try to divvy up, the fight, it was pretty much health insurers and employers versus providers and private equity firms that have stakes in hospitals. And the health insurers really wanted to try to see if they could avoid arbitration and use benchmark rates for trying to solve disputes in surprise medical billing. And the hospitals didn't want to use benchmark rates, which would be lower prices, basically, like Medicare prices, and preferred arbitration, where they thought that would be a better process for them to get to the outcome. So what ultimately happened is that they included legislation in the COVID package that passed last month that would hold patients harmless for emergency care, emergency situations, and in unique circumstances where it's not emergency, but they can't find their in-network provider, for their HMO or whatever health plan that they're in. And it also includes, air ambulance transportation. So if there's a dispute in a claim, a bill that the hospital submits, it'll allow 30 days for the insurers and the hospitals to try to work out a payment arrangement. And if they're not able to do that, then they're going to go to the arbitration. It is a win in essence that the insurers, the hospitals and physicians are only going to use their bill. They won't be able to use their bill charges for arbitration. Hospitals submit usually just in some cases unjustified charges. It could be whatever they want to submit. If anybody's gotten a hospital bill, it's very confusing, and you think you may owe certain things, but that's what your insurers are going to pay. So it says you have to submit basically what would be an in-median network charge, but it also bars Medicare and Medicaid rates from being used in arbitration. Medicare usually pays about 80% of the cost of care of hospitals, and that's why hospitals complain a lot about what Medicare pays, and they usually offset it, as you know, from commercial payments. So that was a win for the hospitals, and that was a last-minute tweak that the American Medical Association worked into the language. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware of this. I understand California has a fairly comprehensive state law as it addresses surprise medical billing, and they'll probably try to gel the two with this federal provision. Next slide, please. So Leslie Rutledge was the Attorney General from Arkansas, who is mentioned in the Rutledge versus PCMA, and PCMA is the Pharmaceutical Care Management Association. And this was a significant court case that I just wanted to bring to your attention. It was a unanimous decision, but basically the state of Arkansas wrote a law saying that PBMs couldn't pay community pharmacists below wholesale cost for drugs. And PBMs have very opaque type formularies that they work out with health insurers and others on how they pay. And because they have such high leverage with the customers and consumers they bring, they're able to negotiate low rates with pharmacies, and pharmacies were taking a hit with that. So Arkansas went and passed a law that said, you couldn't pay them below the wholesale rate. And the PBMs, basically their association, filed suit saying, no, we can do this. We're exempted under ERISA. And the PCMA and the PBMs lost that argument in the Supreme Court. What does that mean to us and other things like that? So health plans usually are working with PBMs, et cetera. This will take some time I think to digest, but some states like California and other states may take more aggressive action on how PBMs work in their states, and that could have perhaps a market impact on how health plans charge when it comes to drug costs. So it'll be something to sort of watch, and I think it'll be more on the state level. Next slide, please. Most favored nation rule. This was a rule that was passed by the Trump administration, and it actually has some bipartisan support. And it was done to basically address Medicare Part B drugs, and that is traditional Medicare, fee-for-service Medicare, and Part B drugs are drugs that are traditionally given by a physician. intravenous, cancer drugs, or drugs that are tied to perhaps a DME product. And what this rule basically said is that they would try to figure out a way to charge Medicare the same prices that pharmaceuticals are charging other countries that are out there. And this rule, as soon as it came out, was immediately challenged by the pharmaceutical groups, the drug companies, and also bio. So this will be a lawsuit, I think, that we will kind of want to watch and just kind of see how this rule kind of unfolds as it deals with drug costs. For Medicare Advantage, they're not beneficiaries are not included in the most favored nation rules, but it could impact pricing on how they negotiate those contracts with outpatient providers. Next slide, please. So Texas versus California, and this is the case of the mostly Republican states, all Republican states who have filed suit challenging the Affordable Care Act. And Javier Becerra, who's mentioned earlier as a nominee for HHS, has certainly been fending off. And there was a hearing on November 10th, and it didn't go very well for the Republican AG. Their basic argument is that because Congress invalidated the individual mandate, that the entire Affordable Care Act should then fall on its knees. And the justices says, well, Congress already invalidated, the individual mandate when they said that you couldn't charge, more than $0 for a penalty if you didn't get health insurance, and the law is still standing. It's still working. So what really is your argument? And clearly there's precedent to sever a provision, in this case, the individual mandate, if we want to, and allow the other laws, if they're constitutional, to stand. And that's pretty much where most people think this is going to go. So I think that the Affordable Care Act will survive, and they'll simply just sever the individual mandate that was the provision, which is only about a page in the Affordable Care Act. So we should get that decision in late spring. So I don't see any huge, market shakeup because of this case. Next slide, please. So what can we expect this year? And really kind of goes to what Tony was talking about earlier about control of the Senate in Georgia. So I'm going to go under the presumption that Ossoff's going to win, not just because I'm a Democrat, but it's looking pretty good, and maybe talk to you about what could get accomplished in the Senate that would be of significance. So Biden has pretty much put out that he wasn't going to do Medicare for all, despite Bernie Sanders and others really pushing for it. But he's very interested in lowering the Medicare eligibility from 65 to 60. It could go to 55. That'll probably be a debate, but we'll say 65 to 60. That is something that I personally feel could possibly get done in the Senate. The Senate, as you know, works with 60 votes to do anything, given where we are with the filibuster rule. But there's a process that the Senate can work through, which is called budget reconciliation. It was a process that was employed in 2010 when we passed the Affordable Care Act, when Democrats only had 59 Democrats. And most recently, the budget reconciliation, and Tony can talk to this too, was passed in the 2017 tax law. That's how the Republicans got the tax law through. And that process only requires a simple majority. So if it is 50-50, then Vice President Harris could come in and they could actually do something under budget reconciliation. And there's a process for that. But I personally believe that Medicare eligibility could be one where they lower the age, and that would be something that they could actually take up and do. There's the cost to do from 65 to 60 is about 200 billion over 10 years. So that's something I think that they could pay for if they're doing some other tax reforms. And I actually do feel that some Republicans could be supportive on the age reduction on that piece. The public option, as you know, is something else that President Biden campaigned on. And his vision of a public option would simply be that everybody could buy into a Medicare program, a Medicare policy. That's how he would envision it. And whether you have health insurance or not, if you have employer insurance or individual insurance, you could still buy into it if you wanted to do it. The cost associated with that from some early scoring models has it over $1 trillion over 10 years. So I think it's less likely, just given how he would approach the public option and the cost associated with that, especially if you have a slim majority in the Senate versus a lower cost ability to do something perhaps for Medicare. What I think that they would do in lieu of a public option is try to give more incentive to states. We have about 14 states that have an expanded Medicaid, and give them more incentives to expand, and that would, I think, help a little bit more with the uninsured pool instead of doing that. Another thing that I don't think would go anywhere, but this is a priority too for President Biden and Democrats, is allow the federal government to be able to negotiate for cost in Medicare for drug costs. And I just still don't see that having any type of pathway still really kind of in the Senate, but we'll see. Next slide, please. So one of the things that the House will do, and Speaker Pelosi has included in every major healthcare bill that has made it out of the House, is that they've always included some enhancements to the Medicare program. Medicare Advantage plans, as you know, will offer extra benefits like dental, vision, hearing, silver sneakers, spa memberships, things like that. But traditional Medicare, as you know, does not offer a dental benefit, a vision or hearing benefit. And so if there's an attempt to do certain things in budget reconciliation, not only would I think Democrats would work to lower the age, but they would also include, I think, enhancements to the Medicare program to include these three. These would be significant costs associated with it, but I think that they would include it. Next slide, please. Drug costs will always be an issue for Congress. We weren't able to do anything, pass anything through Congress that could make it to President Trump. It's such a difficult issue, as you know, to get done. So what President Trump did was basically kind of work on rules and regs, like some of the ones I just mentioned to you, most favored nation. But a priority for Democrats that you will see will be drug costs. And in some major bills that they passed, these are some provisions that they tried to do where they tried to cap amount of money that would be charged under Part D out of pocket expenses to $2,000, where we don't currently have a cost. They would continue to try to make the secretary be able to negotiate with drug companies for Medicare, something they've been trying for several years. I still think that will be very difficult to find 60 votes perhaps in the Senate, to do some of these things, which you would still need 60 votes perhaps to do if it falls out of sort of budget context. So those are just a few things. Next slide, please, Alex. What could get done in the Senate, if we have a 50-50 Senate? During this public health emergency, we've been operating under waivers for telehealth expansion and telehealth services, where traditionally you'd have to go in face-to-face, and now you would not. You can basically call even a new provider, which Medicare wouldn't allow you to do, to try to set up an appointment or do a health service over the phone. Traditionally, these type of things that have been done through telehealth have been only allowed through rural counties and zip codes. And there are other restrictions. And so during the pandemic, HHS has authorized waivers to allow the expansion of telehealth services. And it's been well received, and there's been a lot of bipartisan support for this. Medicare Advantage has done telehealth for many, many years. And they, when I was doing a lot of work for MA plans, we had about 5% utilization. Some seniors just weren't comfortable doing it. But during the surge, I've talked to a lot of the Medicare Advantage plans, and they said they were up to about 30% in utilization. And then in traditional fee-for-service Medicare, this benefit has been something that has been enjoyed by millions. And so I do think that some of these things actually can be codified. Some of these things will actually have to be through legislation to get fixed. Mike Thompson, of Napa Valley, Congressman Mike Thompson of California of Napa Valley. He's on the Ways and Means Committee, and he's a co-sponsor of 2 major bills involved in it. So if there's an interest from LACERA or any of our beneficiaries that would like to learn more or work more, I'd be happy to set up a call with that office just to talk about it. But I actually do think in the next couple of months, this could be something that could be passed on a bipartisan basis. Next slide, please. What can we expect in a Biden administration? It's going to be, clearly fixed on the pandemic, and right now, the issues that y'all even talked about with the vaccine distribution and so forth. So he's made it very clear that he wants to provide more federal guidance and more federal leadership to help states, and that will probably be, requiring masks in at least federal buildings and leading by example. He's also made it a priority to try to get schools back face-to-face and prioritize inoculation for teachers in that process. What we've seen that's come out in the last couple of weeks and what we're seeing now with the vaccine distribution is sort of the slow roll. They were trying to get, as 20 million Americans, the healthcare professionals and seniors that were at a high risk inoculated, and we're probably up to about 5 million right now. They just today announced they're trying to get some of these vaccines to pharmacies to go in directly and have seniors go there and get it, because some are not comfortable at the hospitals. The hospitals are having a very difficult time with this, just given, especially LA County and others, what they're dealing with, being able to go through this process, to go through the cold storage and other things that are going to go through. So I think he's going to spend a great deal of time really kind of trying to better organize and provide better federal guidance to sort of help in the vaccine distribution. Some of the things that are involved as it relates to who's, the prioritization, that's all run by the states. That's in California and the various states. Those states are the ones who are deeming people essential. And so I have had a lot of clients that have come and asked questions about where they fall in line on the prioritization. And it really still, the feds are offering recommendations and guidance, but it's really up to the states. And some of the states like Florida, like you've seen, how they're doing some of the distributions have deviated from some of that guidance, and others are trying to follow it as best they can. But all that is really kind of handled, with the states on the prioritization. Next slide, please. And that's it. So I'd be happy to take questions as it relates to healthcare, if I could help anybody.
So I have Mr. Pryor in the queue, and then anyone else.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the GOP web GPO. I think Les brought up that firefighters and our national brothers and even locally that we've been against the web GPO, which really isn't true. I think it's just a very long-term perspective, and that the web GPO, the answer to the web GPO has always been from not just Republicans, but even some Democrats, has always been, if you ask for web GPO, we will put you into Social Security. And I think that threat still has to be at least surveyed, and we have to be very careful that we're not furthering the cause of moving our retirement system into Social Security by continuing to seek web GPO. It's still a threat. And I think to characterize us as against it isn't. And I know what Les is saying, and we've been involved in this for 30 years now together. But I think that it's something that we do have to be careful of, and that's something that all of our legislative advocates and other nonprofit organizations and advocacy groups need to be careful of, is inclusion in Social Security, the very thing that CPERS was founded for. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pryor. Any other trustee questions or comments? Mr. Liu?
Yes, thank you, Chair Bernstein. So I'd just like to thank Joe and Naomi and Tony and Shane for a great presentation. One last comment from me was I understand from a previous meeting that one of the trustees wanted maybe a future educational session on how the legislative process works. So I can work with our advocates on that. But also, I'm just wondering if there are any other topics that you were interested in that we can put on the radar.
Hearing none, I would just encourage people, if they do have ideas, to send them to Barry later.
Great,
Yeah,
thank you.
Alan, I'd just like to say one thing. It would be, and I think we would all like to, and Santos can do this, is an update on Proposition 19, if we could get some thorough understanding of that, because it's, when you read it, it's a little confusing. I'm not sure we really understand all the parts of it.
We will go ahead and try to get a representative from LA County Assessor's Office to make a presentation.
I'd say one thing, and that is that if we do have a presentation, it'll be next month and we won't have time.
Yeah, we will try to work something out. I need to think about the timing. Maybe we can have a joint meeting. I know that we were talking about a joint meeting sometime in.
Yeah, but I think Vivian's right, Santos. If we're going to make a transfer of that property, we need to really understand what we should and shouldn't do.
So in the meantime, what I will do is reach out to the assessor's office, get whatever information they have, public information they have, and I'll submit that to all of the board trustees, and then arrange for us to send it out to our members as well through an email blast at a minimum. But we'd like to try to have a meeting or a presentation so that we're all understand what's going on. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Everyone who presented, thank you so much. Excellent presentations. Barry, thank you for pulling it together. I'm going to recommend that we take a 9-minute break. It's 10:51 on my clock, and that we get back together at 11, but I want to give everyone an opportunity to take a break. So if that's okay with staff, we will be out of session until 11 o'clock.
Thank you, everyone.
Ani, are you here?
I am.
Great. We are back in session. And we are now on to item 7B, report on experience study and evaluation educational session regarding OPEB. That will be presented by Ted Granger from staff and some of our fine actuaries from Milliman. So Ted, I will turn it over to you.
Excellent, thank you. Good morning, Happy New Year. And consistent with what Barry Liu indicated earlier, we're here today to provide you with an educational session regarding the 2020 OPEB experience study and evaluation process. And we're doing that because it's timely in terms of the process itself. So if you'll indulge us, I will give a high-level overview of the process from a LACERA administrative perspective, and then I will kick it over to Milliman, and they will obviously provide a overview and dive into the actuarial process itself. By the way, once I hand it over, I will be giving it to Robert Schmidt. He is here on the line from Milliman, as well as Janet Jennings. So just wanted to mention that they have joined us. So anyway, Alex, if you could pull up the slides and maybe go to slide 2 for me, please, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, so this is basically a list of topics I'll be covering very briefly. It is quite a list, but I will promise to work through this list very quickly. Again, we will be talking about the 2020 OPEB actuarial cycle, and this essentially is our big year, if you will. We're performing the experience study as well as the evaluation. And in essence, that's why we're providing this educational session. Alex, next slide, please. Okay, so this is the history. In 2012, GASB issued new pension reporting standards. They promised to issue new OPEB reporting standards, and they in fact did. In 2012-2013, LACERA and the county held preliminary discussions about establishing an OPEB trust. Of course, the county did do that. Two of the concerns they had at the time, one was cost control, the other one was separate reporting for the OPEB participants. In 2015, the OPEB standards were issued. GASB 74 applied to LACERA at the time as a cost sharing plan, and GASB 75 applied to the employers. Next slide, please, Alex. In 2016, the GASB standards were issued. They applied to LACERA for the fiscal year in 2017, GASB 74. The plan sponsors implemented GASB 75 in 2018. And the following year, we changed our methodology. We were a cost sharing reporting structure, meaning that the valuation and the financial statement reports, the GASB reports, were prepared under a cost sharing model. We switched that over to the agent model at the county's request. And this basically separated out all of the different agents and their cost and expenses, which were essentially identified by agent. This impacted both the actuarial reports as well as the accounting reports. And finally, in 2019, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, the GASB 84 implementation was completed by LACERA. So again, just to recap the history, we've gone through, I think, 4 significant changes. One is the establishment of the OPEB trust, the implementation of the OPEB standards, the agent model reporting structure change, and the implementation of the GASB 84. So that's kind of where we're at in terms of the history. Next slide, please, Alex. Just to remind your board, we do have a policy. This policy covers the experience study cycle that normally occurs every 3 years. We're currently on a 2-year cycle to capture all of these changes. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to increase the experience study for a short term, have it done every 2 years, and then revert it back to the 3-year cycle. And that is, again, to make sure we're capturing and auditing all of the changes that we've made over the last several years. We are preparing annual valuations, and that's consistent with the pension plan. That also helps us provide the financial statement information the plan sponsors need for their financial statements. Next slide, please, Alex. Okay, this is the OPEB program structure. We have 7 participants. All of them provide funding on a pay-as-you-go basis. The smaller box, the 3 participants there are participating in the OPEB trust. So they also, they essentially provide 2 levels of funding. One is the pay-go, the other one is funding for the OPEB trust program. Next slide, please, Alex. Okay, so this is the valuation by numbers. A quick snapshot of last year's valuation. Obviously, we're working on the 2020 valuation. The funded ratio at 6%, the AAL about $20.7 billion. Next slide, please, Alex. The actual process, this is, there's a lot of information here. I'll just very quickly walk through it. We put together a stakeholder group that includes members of the Los Angeles County staff, folks from the auditor controller, folks from the CEO's office. The county's actuary Chiron participates. Riel Letzen, the actuary for SEIU Local 721. Jim participates. Of course, the Milliman actuaries, the LACERA reviewing actuaries, Kavanaugh McDonald, participate, as well as Siegel, LACERA's healthcare benefit consultant. So that's really the group that kind of walks through the nuts and bolts of this process. We will be reviewing the assumptions this year. That's part of the experience study. The actuaries enjoy a very long conference call where they sort of hash out how things are looking, what things might need to be changed, what methods we might employ for the upcoming valuation. Again, that's part of the experience study. We'll bring that report back to your board. Then we prepare the evaluation. The experience study is kind of a precursor. The methods and assumptions are used as input in preparing the evaluation report, which obviously is the final numbers. This cycle includes a review. Kavanaugh McDonald will be reviewing the experience study report as well as the evaluation report. Next slide, please. Oh, this is really just a graphical a view of the process I just described. So first we prepare and perform the experience study, and then we prepare the evaluation report, and finally the GASB reports are prepared subsequently. So again, the evaluation side of things, those reports are used for funding decisions. The GASB reports are used for accounting and reporting. The evaluation reports are prepared, essentially, they serve as a basis to prepare the accounting reports, if you will. Next slide, please, Alex. All right, actuarial review, I've touched upon this already. The experience study report will be reviewed, and basically what CAVMAC does is they look at the assumptions for reasonableness to make sure they're in compliance with actuarial standards, to make sure nothing is falling outside of sort of the norms. In terms of the evaluation report, CAVMAC does replicate the results within their actuarial model, and they compare those results to Milliman's results, and just to make sure the tolerances are not too significant. So that's kind of in a nutshell what the reviewing actuary does. Next slide, please, Alex. And the all-important accounting process. Again, the accountants are worried about financial statement reporting, GASB 74 and GASB 75. The agent plan structure is very important because it starts at the valuation, and then that agent structure flows through to the accounting and reporting. So the GASB 75 report is an agent report in essence to the plan sponsors and provides specific information for the plan sponsors' financial statements. That's kind of a nutshell of the accounting. Next slide, please, Alex. Adoption of GASB 84. So this year, for the financial statements that we just completed, 2020, LACERA did adopt GASB 84. And essentially, we're shifting over now to the reporting of the operations of the RHC program, basically the pay-as-you-go piece. And previously, what happened was we had sort of this quasi-income statement that we provided in the disclosures of the financial statements. But we did have a column or set of information we provided in the balance sheet. So there was kind of a mismatch. We didn't really have an income statement for the financial operations of the RHC, but we did have a balance sheet. GASB 84 said, let's rectify that. So now LACERA's statements include essentially 3 columns on the balance sheet and 3 columns on the income statement. One column is the pension trust activities. The next column would be the OPEB trust activities. And the last column would be the OPEB custodial fund, which is really the RHC operational activities or the financial flows. So that's really, in essence, GASB 84. And then since LACERA, or I guess since the county asked us to shift to the agent plan, LACERA doesn't have a whole lot of information to report under the GASB 74 because the net OPEB liability basically flows through to the plan sponsors or to the agents, and that information goes into their financial statements. Next slide, please, Alex. External audits. So again, we're talking about the accounting part of it. Because LACERA is giving information to the county to report in their financial statements via these GASB 75 reports, it's very important that the county can rely on that information. And so what we do is, per the audit standards, is LACERA's auditor, Plant Moran, audits 2 things. One is OPEB financial data. The other one is member census data. So Plant Moran issues those audit opinions, and that gives assurance to the county that the information we're giving them can be reported and relied upon for their financial statements. So we work on that through the annual financial audit process for LACERA. Next slide, please, Alex. Okay, so this again is the reporting cycle. We've just kind of summarized it here. Today we're having the educational session. We'll have a stakeholder meeting. I did describe a stakeholder group. The experience study report, obviously that's reviewing all the methods and assumptions. We'll bring back that report. Then we'll prepare the valuation report. We'll have an exit meeting at the stakeholder level, and then we'll bring the evaluation report back to the board. So this process is expected to be about 7 or 8 months, and we'll certainly be excited about the upcoming meetings and presenting those reports. So unless there's any questions for me, next slide, please, Alex. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Robert and Janet.
Are there any questions? Let's keep moving forward.
Great, thanks.
Okay, I'm Robert. Y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Appreciate the opportunity to present. Want to wish the board and members of this call Happy New Year. And we appreciate the opportunity to give you some more actuarial background on OPEB. We were planning for about 30 minutes. I wanted to do a time check just to start off to make sure that that timing will still work.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Could someone, do you have the actuarial presentation? Okay. Thank you. Please go to the next slide. All right. So we're going to cover several different things today. It's maybe a little high-level timeline of our process. It's a little description of the stakeholders, and then delve into the process we follow in the experience study we're working on, the methodology behind the investment earnings assumption, and other economic assumptions, and some details about the valuation itself. And then we do have another discussion item as well to start talking about relating to amortization methods when we calculate the actuarially determined contribution. And then at the end, as has been requested in the past, we now have an appendix with some additional background along with a glossary of key terms that we use, kind of the acronyms that we use in our actuarial work. Next slide, please.
Hi, this is Janet Jennings. I work with Robert Schmidt at Milliman. The 2020 funding valuation projects will be very similar to the projects that we conducted in 2018. As Ted mentioned, we will start with the experience study, which will review OPEB-specific economic and demographic assumptions. After that, there'll be an actuarial review of the assumptions and methods from Kavanaugh McDonald. The next project in 2020 will be the funding valuation. This is the OPEB funding valuation where Kavanaugh McDonald will review the results on a replication basis. That means that Kavanaugh McDonald will run their own valuation and then we'll compare the results to make sure they're within tolerance. Next slide, please. This is a little bit more detailed chart of the timing that Ted had mentioned. We received, the green items are meetings and the blue items are activities. So we start receiving the data in August and receive that through November. We do have an entrance meeting with all the stakeholders that Ted mentioned, and in October. We have completed the census, which Cassandra has reviewed our summaries, and are currently working on the experience study. You'll see the second green item is the educational meeting, which we are now having. And then we'll meet again with the stakeholders in February to review the assumptions and get their input. In March, we'll meet with you again to review the assumptions for your approval. In March, we also will receive the July 1, 2021 updated premiums so that we can incorporate those in the first year trend. We'll be conducting the funding valuation from March through May, and then we'll have a closing stakeholder meeting in June, and then the final Board of Retirement meeting for your consideration of approval in either July or August. Next slide, please. So this is another picture of the stakeholders that Ted mentioned. We include all the agents, including LA County, Superior Court, LACERA, and the outside districts such as SCAQMD. SEIU is also included, and the LACERA's healthcare consultant, Siegel, joins in the meetings and provides their input. The actuaries from those groups are also included. So we work with Chiron from LA County, Kavanaugh McDonald, who's the actuarial reviewer, Rail and Letson, which represents SEIU, and of course, Robert and I are included from Milliman. Next slide, please. So more details on the experience study. You'll see that it is going to be very similar to the last experience study we completed in 2018. We look at data from the last 3 years, from 2018, 2019, and 2020. We also look at the assumptions on a combined basis for all plan sponsors under the OPEB program. So we do not split assumptions by the various agents. It's important to note that in 2019, the retirement experience study was already conducted, and that evaluated things like retirement rates, withdrawal rates, and morbidity. So those changes were already included in our July 1, 2019 OPEB valuation. The OPEB experience study will review the demographic assumptions, things like once a retiree retires, what's the likelihood that they're going to elect a medical or dental plan? And then once they decide to elect a plan, which plan and which tier would they select? And also, if they select a tier that includes a spouse, how old is that spouse likely to be with respect to the retiree's age? We review the Anthem plans with respect to Medicare enrollment, and we also look at survivor and new dependent enrollment rates. For retirement of vested terminated members, we look at that for each general and safety retirement plan. Some of the economic assumptions that we look at are the investment return assumptions that Robert will speak to in more detail. And we also look at the trends for medical, dental, and Part B. Robert will also talk about the amortization methods just as a preview for what could come in the future. It's important to note that for the experience study, we do not include the July 1, 2021 renewals, and that's only because we don't receive those renewals until the experience study is completed. But we do include the trends, in the experience study. Okay, next slide, please. Robert will speak to the investment earnings.
Okay, so the investment earnings assumption that we use used to be the same for the accounting and the funding of the program, and it was based on a blend of the expected return from the OPEB trust and the general assets, and it was based on the percent of the annual required contribution, which was an old GASB 4345 term that was funded. Now, however, the accounting and funding investment earnings assumptions are different. And that's because the new GASB statements, 74 and 75, now have a more prescribed approach that we have to follow when we're doing the accounting valuations. They require us to use a very strict depletion date projection methodology that doesn't reflect new entrants into the plan in the same way that it reflects current members of the plan. And it also requires a blend of the expected return from the OPEB trust and the bond buyer general obligation rate that gets published I think it's a daily publishing of that rate, and we use the rate on the day before the valuation, day of the valuation date. So So for that reason, we have a different discount rate for GASB. Although we do project at some point that the GASB discount rate will converge to the funding interest rate once there are sufficient assets in the fund that the depletion date projection that we are required to use no longer depletes the fund. So that's the GASB approach to investment earnings. For the funding valuation, we use an approach more consistent with what you see in the pension side, where we look at the actuarial standards, and I'll show you a little bit more about that process, but we're basically looking at information from Makita and calculating the estimated investment return based on asset classes. Next slide, please. So when we look at the agents and how we used to do it under cost sharing, what we had was when we were with a cost sharing plan prior to July 1 of 2018, we just combined assets and had proportionate shares for all the employers. But beginning July 1, 2018, when we changed to a cost sharing, from cost sharing to agent, what that did was it required us to track the assets a little bit more in detail. So because each employer can have a different funding policy, which necessitated the agent structure that we have today. So with the agent structure, the assets of each agent employer are partitioned and tracked separately by LACERA staff. And they're partitioned and tracked according to each employer's funding actions. So, you know, if one employer decides to fund more than another employer, then they will have proportionally more assets, and we will reflect that in the funding valuation that we do. So because of the investment earnings assumption and the agent structure, it's important that we look at the characteristics of each agent when setting this assumption. So if an agent is pre-funding, we can use the OPEB trust return as the investment assumption, investment earnings assumption. If they're not pre-funding, therefore, we would use the county general fund investment earnings as a funding assumption, since the funding of the plan is based on current assets, short-term assets, rather than assets in the OPEB trust. Okay, next slide, please. So let's look at how the investment return applies in our experience studies. The prior investment return assumptions were set when we did the 2018 experience study, and we included those assumptions in the July 1, 2018 and July 1, 2019 funding valuations. After that, the determination was made, or during that period, the determination was made that the schedule of OPEB contributions plus interest would be adequate to pay benefit payments over the long run. So for that reason, in conjunction with our reviewing actuary, the recommendation was made to go ahead and use the trust expected return as that assumption. So agents that are pre-funding based on our 2018 study had an expected return of 6%, and that was based on Makita's 2018 capital market assumptions. Agents not pre-funding ended up with a return of 3.69% based on the county's general assets. That represents a very small portion of the OPEB program with those non-pre-funding agents. On the next slide, I'd like to just give you a little more detail of the agents and the return assumptions. You can see the pre-funding agents, the county, LACERA, and Superior Court, we're using 6%, and then the outside districts that are listed there using the 3.69%. We are in the process of utilizing updated information from Makita to evaluate these assumptions in our new, current experience study now. When we do that, on the next slide, we're going to use a methodology that looks a lot like what you see here. This is the details of the methodology we used back in the 2018 experience study. You can see we looked at the target allocation policy, took a weighted average expected real rate of return and a nominal return. And based on that, combined with correlations and standard deviations, we ended up with the 6% assumption. So we're going to follow a very similar approach to this in looking at the most current assumptions from Makita and the allocation policies to come up with that OPEB trust expected return. On the next slide, it looks at the general assets approach. As you can see with the general assets, it's a much simpler approach because the asset classes are much fewer. In the last experience study, about 37% was in cash with the balance in short-term U.S. bonds. That's how we ended up with the 3.69% geometric return, which is the one we use for the valuation. Those are slightly different because the geometric return, as the footnote says, takes into account the volatility and the variability of expected returns, which means that you end up with a slightly lower return when you look at the geometric versus the arithmetic. Okay, going to the next slide. We also do consider actual historical earnings compared to inflation using a building block approach. And this is a history of those returns for the county general assets all the way back to 1989, when, as you all recall, inflation was much higher than it is today. So the returns were much higher back then. See, those returns have come down considerably. So this is a data point that we do consider, and we set a range with using a building block approach on top of the 2.75% inflation assumption that is being used, consistent with the pension program and the OPEB program. Janet is going to talk about health cost trends on the next slide.
Thank you, Robert. So the health cost trend approach will be very similar to how we've developed the trends in the past. We'll look at the inflation rate. And as I've noted earlier, the July 1, 2021 medical and dental vision renewals with the premium rates for the short-term trends will be incorporated at the valuation stage due to timing. The medical and pharmacy trends will be weighted for both pre and post 65 plans. And the fourth bullet pertains to the fact that healthcare trends have been increasing faster than inflation. But at some point, there has to be a limit to how much is spent on healthcare as a portion of the GDP. So for our long-term trends, we use parameters around the GDP growth and the expected health share of GDP, and at what point in time that would taper off. We also look at the impacts of expected taste and technology, and that's what we call the excess medical cost growth. And we also incorporate administrative fee trends and the Affordable Care Act fees. As you are aware, the excise tax has been repealed, and we did not include that in the July 1, 2019 OPEB funding valuation, and we will not include that in the future. For 2020, this is the last calendar year for the health insurer fee, and then after that, that fee will not be imposed anymore, so that you'll see the impact of that in the trends. We'll continue to split the medical trends between pre and post 65 members. And the dental trends will continue to use the same methodology as in the past, where we take into account the fact that the indemnity plan has an annual limit of $1,500, and we assume that that won't change. Also of note is that we will also do the Part B trends, where we'll look at some of the information from Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, CMS. So on the next slide, 15, this goes into a little bit more detail of when we use which sets of premium data. So for the claim cost basis, we use the 7/1/20 to 6/30/2021 premiums. For the first year trends, we incorporate the 7/1/2021 premiums, and we do that at the valuation stage rather than the experience study, as we mentioned earlier. We also continue to use similar methods for the tier 2 benchmark, and so that shouldn't change for this 7/1/20 project as well. Robert will now speak to the discussion item around amortization methods.
Okay, please go to the, I guess, slide 17. This slide is starting to introduce you to something that we expect will come down the road in the next few years. And to set the context here, what I'd like to do is talk first about the current method we use to amortize the unfunded actuarial accrued liability when we calculate the ADC, or annual required or actuarially determined contribution. So since adoption of GASB 45, we have used a 30-year level percent of pay open amortization method. And the reason that was used is because that was the original annual required contribution, or ARC requirement, that was part of GASB 45 and 43. A characteristic of this approach that we have noted in our evaluations is that it does result in negative amortization. And what that means is that the amortization payment, because the period is 30 years and it's level percent of pay, the payment, first year amortization payment, is not enough to reduce the principal of the unfunded actuarial accrued liability. That's what negative amortization is. However, projections that we've done over 40 to 50-year periods do project to achieve funded ratios in the 70 to 80% range, despite the open 30 amortization period. And we do those projections every valuation now, because they're necessary to do the depletion date work for the GASB work. So there is a disconnect between the depletion on the GASB work and our actual projections, and that's again because for the GASB work we have to carve out new entrants and exclude them from the calculation. So by not being able to count contributions for future new entrants, that ends up showing a depletion of the fund, which we don't think will actually happen in reality. But like I say, we have to do the calculations that way for the GASB 74 and 75. But the other thing worth noting here is that because it's a 30-year open rolling 30-year level percent of pay, projections never do get to 100% absent in other actuarial or investment gains. Now, for the OPEB program, the way that the agent employers are ramping up their contributions, we do project them to reach the ADC in the next 10 to 15 years. And then we assume that once they hit the ADC, that they'll continue to contribute the ADC. Now, what's happening here is that ASOP 4, or Actuarial Standard of Practice number 4, which applies to pension plans, had an exposure draft last year that does require two things when it comes to the amortization. First of all, the UAAL needs to be amortized over a reasonable time period, or it needs to reduce the outstanding balance by a reasonable amount each year. So a 30-year rolling isn't considered a reasonable time period, because it's rolling, meaning you never do count down from 30 to 29 and ultimately down to 0. And as I said earlier, since it's a negative amortization, it doesn't reduce the outstanding balance by a reasonable amount each year. So the method we're using today would not pass muster with the current ASOP 4 exposure draft. But keep in mind, there is no ASOP yet that exists for OPEB amortization. So we're not concerned in the immediate term about a requirement here. It's just something we need to think about for down the road when that requirement does come down the road, if it in fact does, and we think there's a good chance that it will. Next slide, please. So I want to just talk a little bit about some ideas that we may consider when it comes to the amortization. And some of these may look familiar because for those of you that are familiar with the pension plan, some of these are in use today. First of all, we look at the number of years. So as I said earlier, we need to avoid negative amortization. And with our current 6% investment earnings assumption and a 3.25% general wage increase, that means that the amortization period would need to be less than about 21 years to avoid a negative amortization. Now, the pension plan uses 20-year layers, and because of that, the pension plan would avoid that negative amortization. When it comes to what I call the open versus the closed amortization, it's currently open. So open methods will tend not to ever pay off the UAAL because you're always rolling over the loan in a sense to a new 30-year period or whatever your period is. But closed periods are designed to ultimately pay off the UAAL and get to a 100% funded ratio. Now, the pension plan does use closed periods, so that's another consideration. A third consideration is whether the amortization is a layered series of amortization bases. With the pension plan, it sets up a new base each year. And what that means is you take the unfunded actuarial liability, you look at it, and you see how much it changed from what it was expected to be. And then a new base is set up for that difference between the actual and expected unfunded actuarial accrued liability each year. And so you have layers of amortizations. Next slide, please. There are a couple of other final considerations when it comes to amortizing the unfunded actuarial accrued liability. One is whether you use level percent of payroll or level dollar amount. Currently, we do use level percent of pay, and pension uses level percent of pay, and that is a common method that is used with public systems because it makes the contributions more budgetable because they're relating directly to pay rather than some dollar amount that may not be related to pay. Also, final thing to think about is how you would transition from the current methodology, which, as I said earlier, is the 30-year rolling. If you wanted to move from an open period to a closed period or a period with fewer years, there are lots of different ways you could transition. This is just an example. You could change the current base from open to closed and then set up maybe a 25-year base next year, and followed by that a 24-year base, and so on down to 20 years. And the reason I picked 20 is because it's used in the pension side, but there's nothing sacred about 20 as long as we meet the two requirements of not having a negative amortization. So reducing the UAL by a meaningful amount each year, and ultimately hopefully paying off the UAL as an either or option there. Okay, looks like we may have a few minutes for questions. I believe that is all that we have. If you go to the next slide. So if there are any questions, Janet or I are happy to answer them.
I don't see anyone in the queue. Are there any questions for Ted or the Milliman actuaries?
Alan, I have one question.
Go ahead.
The projections, you're projecting 6% and 3 1/4. Is that correct on this fund? 6% return, 3 1/4 increase in wages.
Yes, Mr. Oakham, that is correct. Those are the assumptions that we used in 2018 and 2019. However, we are studying those, in the process of studying those now, and when we come back to this board in March, we may be presenting a different investment return. I don't expect the inflation assumption to change.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And typically, Robert, we carry over the inflation assumption from the pension plan assumptions. Typically, that's how we get to the 3.25.
Yep, that's correct. Thanks,
Okay,
Ted.
thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ted.
You're welcome, and we look forward to presenting the reports in the future.
We look forward to it too. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Item C is for information only, but item D is a presentation. So if there aren't any questions about item C, we'll move on to Dr. Natoya and the Administrative Equity Initiative presentation.
Good morning, all, and Happy New Year. I'm here to present the Administrative Equity Initiative that was previously approved. So, Alex, can we, I think maybe Alex, you're driving. Can you show us the next slide? Oh, here we go. Okay, so this morning I'll present LACERA's proposed plans to address enhance diversity, equity, inclusion at LACERA and review the impact of those plans. Can we have the next slide, please? One more. Thank you. So at the Board of Investments meeting on September 9th, 2020, trustees approved the Investment Equity Initiative. In December, we heard how investments will move DEI forward with the tide towards inclusion, diversity, and equity initiative. Today, you'll hear some more about building a career pipeline in pension administration and financial services. Next slide, please, Alex. At the October 7th, 2020 Board of Retirement meeting, the Board of Retirement approved the Administrative Equity Initiative. It's the partner initiative to the investment side. Today, you'll hear more about how LACERA proposes to engage, educate, and provide equity and opportunity to learn about pension fund administration, asset management, and career opportunities in those fields. Next, Alex. One more. So LACERA plans to leverage relationships with high schools, colleges, universities, community-based, and interest-based organizations to attract and involve traditionally underrepresented and female students to participate in our program. Next slide, please, Alex. The high school program plan is to provide a general overview or a survey of LACERA's investments and administration. And a more detailed program plan is for college and university students and provides them more detail, more relevant detail into our fund and how we administer our fund. It will also be important to educate on the differences in responsibility and oversight given to the Board of Investments, the CEO, and the CIO. This is something very unique about LACERA. Given recent state legislation, it will also be very informative to explore how trustees are added to the board in order to inspire the next wave of investment leaders and decision makers. Next slide, please, Alex. So year one, this is a sample agenda. Okay, so the purpose of the LACERA Day, and this is a general name, LACERA Day. It doesn't have a fancy name like TIDE, but it gets to the point. It's to give students examples of the many ways their formal studies relate to career opportunities in their future. It's a practical way to excite and motivate students about future careers and investments, asset management, or in public administration. And this is a sample LACERA Day program, one that might be suitable for high school students or the college program. For many, a LACERA Day will introduce students to careers other than the typical, popular, or more commonly known careers in their majors, or the careers they've traditionally heard as they've been growing up. During LACERA Day, participants get the opportunity to hear from professionals working in a wide variety of jobs, as opposed to receiving information from their counselor or learning about things through personal research. This sample program provides a realistic yet personal view of what it's like to work in an industry and in specific careers. After listening to how staff spend their time, participants may discover that they continue to be interested in a career path, or may find interest in an area they previously were unaware of, and so that they can pursue it. They can pursue research and they can pursue study. So the year one pilot program will be used to provide information to provide maximum impact in the future year programs. So this is a program that builds upon builds upon current programs to enhance the effectiveness and the outcomes of future programs. Okay, next slide, please. So a sample year three program might look like this. So we will continue our year one, the 1 day, 2.5 hour session, and then maybe start to hone in on what students find of interest and provide more of that. So this sample agenda is for a focused LACERA Day for graduates in finance related majors. These programs are intended to use previous year's feedback to be more focused and to maybe partner with a finance program more specifically and more deeply. Small sessions are designed for staff to share their educational preparation, career entry points, career pivot points, development requirements, certifications, and all the continuous learning that they've had over the years that make them really good at their job. I expect this will be a sample agenda like this will be most valuable for those at the very beginning of their study and those at the very end of their course of study. Like most industries, financial services has multiple entry points, and we'll want to discuss the entry level opportunities here at LACERA. These focus sessions will offer students a chance to explore these entry points and the people who've actually held the positions. Next slide, please. So year 5, we hope to be in our groove by year 5, have honed in the program. It provides value to the students and provides value to the program administrators. So this is a sample of a program that's longer term, where the partnership and our commitment is shown. So this is an example of a longer partnership model to partner over the course of a school year. So a school year at this point is 9 or 10 months, but there's holiday months and there's the first month and the last month of class where lots of things are happening. So I'm thinking maybe 5 to 6 sessions might really be able to give to show a progression over the school year. And the goal here is to focus on one topic per month and to strengthen relationships with potential employers. Hopefully LACERA will be an employer of choice, and to strengthen the relationship to even start to explore mentors at the organization. This is especially important for graduate students. Next slide, please, Alex. So this is our feedback model. We want to do something, get feedback, improve, do it again, get feedback and improve. It's an iterative model. And so the desired outcome is a high quality, high impact program. We want our program participants to be able to articulate what it is LACERA does and how. Having a realistic career plan is really the cornerstone of career growth, and access to a $60 billion fund can definitely shape career goals. So next slide, please. Budget and resources. Regarding the staff member resources, LACERA will identify a program coordinator to plan the program and handle logistics. And then process the feedback after each session, because the feedback is going to be a key in creating future programs. Each program, though, will have the same general basic outline, and different staff members can participate either different years or fall and spring, as to not overtax any one set of staff members, and to provide a variety of opinions and personal experiences to our participants. So it's anticipated, because of the current situation, that our first few sessions will be virtual. And once we're able to meet in person, likely a small budget will be needed for program materials like LACERA brochures and other things that explain what it is that we do. Okay, can I have maybe 3 slides, please, Alex? Oh, very good. I'm sorry. Can we go back to diversity at LACERA? Okay, thank you. So LACERA already has a commitment to diversity and engagement. If you recall from the TIDE presentation, we seek to cultivate and maintain a diverse, equitable, and inclusive team here at LACERA. So it's with those same values that we plan to attract and retain interns and to build our career pipeline. Can I have the next slide, please? Benefits of an internship. So the benefits are many. I'll start with a few for the student. The foundation of a career pipeline at LACERA can really be the internship program. The intern program was approved in 2017, and it will be expanded through this administrative equity initiative. So for students, the internship or an internship allows them to apply specific techniques learned in the classroom in a real world setting. It also provides an edge in the job market. Studies have shown that college graduates who already have some work experience in the form of an internship, or those who are already adults working and going back to school, stand out to potential employers. And internship experience makes college graduates more marketable, and they're able to receive a higher starting pay if they already have a base pay. Similarly, those who complete internships are often rated as more competitive as applicants for graduate school and post-grad programs. And lastly, the ability to gain references and recommendations from professionals in the industry, for example, at LACERA, and to gain access to their mentors' network. All of this positively impacts the job marketability of our interns. Next slide, please, Alex. Okay, the intern program centers around project-based work, where an intern is partnered with a staff member mentor. And with that in mind, there's many benefits for LACERA. For example, the mentor fosters increased leadership ability. And this is very valuable for those who are either on a supervisory track or a management track. It increases LACERA's visibility on college campuses. We can now start to say, hey, that we have an internship program. We are an employer of choice. You should consider us for long-term employment. And again, it creates a diverse hiring pipeline, which is especially relevant to HR because some people quote up to 80% of interns are retained in some capacity at the organization where they intern. So that helps our recruiting efforts. Next slide, please, Alex. The expansion of the program will be based on recruiting. Now we will have another focused group to specify in our recruiting efforts. We will emphasize minority and female candidates in our recruiting pools for the internship. Can I have the next slide, please, Alex? Okay. So the budget right now, well, during the mid-year budget, so I guess last month it was approved to expand the interns, the intern line item on our budget. LACERA interns are paid during the, I'm sorry, excuse me. LACERA interns are paid, so there will be an increased cost if more interns are requested per division. And you know, these costs will be presented more thoroughly during the budget development process. But I'd like to just take a minute here on a sticking point about paid internships. Offering a paid internship addresses important equity issues, especially for women and other underrepresented students. Paid internships are a key path to job offers at higher starting salaries. Research conducted by the National Association of Colleges and Employers shows that racial and ethnic minorities are less likely to get a paid internship than others. Specifically, Black students are underrepresented as paid interns and overrepresented as unpaid interns. Latino American students are overrepresented in the groups who have never had an internship. Multiracial students are overrepresented as unpaid interns and among the groups and in the groups who have never had an internship. And first generation students are underrepresented as paid interns and are in the group are now overrepresented in the group that has never had an internship. So the ability to gain an internship and open potential doors is huge for these populations. And about female women students. In a separate study by InternBridge, and they're a company that does research on internships, and they're a consulting firm, they found that 3 out of 4 unpaid internships were held by women, and those also happen to be in fields dominated by women. So this is an important equity issue. The gender pay gap starts as early as at the intern level, and it remains throughout a woman's career. The gender pay gap, if you've listened to any of those studies, is exacerbated by race, where white women earn 80 cents for every dollar earned by a white male, and Black and Latina women earn 63 cents and 64 cents respectively. So if internships lay a good foundation for a successful career, paid internships at a competitive rate offer a foundation for pay equity. So all of this to say that a funded internship is consistent with ideas of workplace equity. Okay, I think this is the last slide. One more. So having heard the plan, is there any feedback or any questions that I can answer?
I don't see anyone in the queue.
This is Gina. I have a question.
Yeah.
Good morning.
If people want to speak, throw yourselves into chat and I'll call on you, but Ms. Aponte,
sorry.
please. No, please, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Just quickly, this whole program speaks very loudly to me. I love doing this. So how much board involvement, if any, is possible?
Well, I think that is up to the boards to decide. I do have in one of the sample agendas that there would be sessions that specifically speak about what is the role of a board member, and where board members are absolutely welcome to share their experiences.
Thank you.
Was there anyone else in the queue?
Alan, I was in the queue. Didn't I send you a chat note?
It's okay. Please go ahead, Mr. Moore.
Okay, yeah. So as the maker of the motion on the equity initiative, I'm very pleased with the progress that I've seen Carly and Santos make on actually taking those words on a piece of paper and actualizing them into some active engagement with the communities, the students, and bringing our organization into much closer alignment with what's going on with the public, and that includes our members and beneficiaries, and dealing with the concerns of their families and being able to participate more fully in our economy and in the workplace. And so we want to do our part, I would think, in making certain that the opportunities that are available at LACERA and in the financial services industry that we can impact are actually made available and accessible to all of the people we come in contact with, which includes our, again, the public, because this is a taxpayer funded organization, and our plan participants and beneficiaries. So I know this is a work in progress, and I know you got a lot more work to do on it, but you have plenty of time. In kind of echoing what Gina just said about participation from the board, I invited you, Carly and Santos, to a couple of meetings of Southern California Edison 1 and the Bridge Builders Foundation 2 on how they're approaching providing information about career opportunities and financial literacy and industry literacy to get some ideas on what to do. And I think that's something that other board members can do. I don't want to micromanage and tell you how to do this. I just want to be able to make sure you know that there are resources and support out there, and I'm available for anything you need me to do, but it's your program, and I'm glad you're seeing that you can have an impact.
Thank you.
That's enough.
Does anyone else have a comment?
I do.
Ms. Gray, go for it. Yes, please.
Very briefly, I also want to thank Carly for the work that she's done in Santos. I have supported Mr. Moore every step of the way for asking for this. I think it's important that we as a community organization, I mean, not a community organization, but our members represent a huge number of the community. And I think it's incumbent upon ourselves to have financial literacy and to give opportunities to those that are going to eventually be leading this organization. So I'm really, really happy with your presentation. Thank you so much. And I hope to assist in any way I can. I agree with Gina. We as board members have a wealth of knowledge. We've come a long way, and we have you know, a lot of history before we even got to the board that we can share also. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to thank you for the presentation. It's new for me. I think it's a great initiative. I do have a request. I wish that there was explicit mention of queer people of color, and particularly queer trans people of color. I just think that everything that we know says that they are particularly underrepresented, that they are particularly afraid of mainstream organizations and mainstream jobs rejecting them, and that an explicit invitation would be valuable. So I don't know if it requires any special action. I just think in the outreach, there can be intentionality that in looking to broaden opportunities for people of color and women, we are specifically interested in hearing from queer and trans people.
Absolutely.
Are there any other comments or questions regarding this? We're going to move on. I have gotten some side requests, and I've texted with Mr. Kryman. It is already noon. We have some items that we can't move. If you aren't following the news, which I'm imagining most people are, there's a fair amount of unrest in DC, which is clearly distracting given the significance of what's going on there today. There's been an expression of interest in moving the performance evaluations. This would be items, executive session item 10B and 10C, moving it to next week. We have a disability calendar, but it's not a particularly long one. So if there's no objection, we will move those two items to next week's agenda and continue on with the rest of the agenda as printed. Hearing no objection, we'll make that change. So again, just so people are clear, we are going to do the public employee performance evaluation 10B and 10C, but we're going to do it next week and not today. So Dr. Natoy, that gives you some free time today, but we look forward to having you back with us next week. And thank you again. Items 7E and F are for information only. So unless there are questions or comments, we'll move on to items for staff review.
Thank you. The board requested that staff work with the assessor's office to share the impact of California Prop 19 regarding the property tax transfers, and that information to be communicated with the trustees as well as the members. And lastly, it was requested that staff work on providing a presentation regarding the legislative process at an upcoming IBL committee. And that concludes items for staff review.
Thank you very much. We're now on to item 9, good of the order. Just to simplify things, I'm going to ask Bonnie to call roll, and people can present their good of the order as they wish as your name is called.
Starting with Mr. Pryor.
I have nothing except to wish everybody a happy and healthy new year. I know things are pretty darn crazy right now, especially within LA County. And, you know, let's continue to lay low. Hopefully the vaccine will take over soon. And I know within our department, it's been, I haven't seen anything like it in the last 30 years, considering the people that work for me, the 81 employees that work for me on the fire department. I've had about a 70% rate of infected employees. And about department-wide, we've had about 2/3 of our employees who have been quarantined and had to be tested within ring testing or trace testing. And fortunately, we have received safety employees on the fire side, and hopefully sheriffs soon have received the first round of the Moderna vaccination. The second round starts around January 21st, I believe. And we will be fully vaccinated at that point. Until that time, it's only about 50% effective, and we're continuing to keep our guard up. So a lot going on out there within LA County. Most of it is very new to us. Fortunately, we have a very good EMS staff and just a rock star of a medical director that's been able to guide us through these tough times. And keep your hopes and prayers for the EMS and the healthcare employees and everybody else that's out there doing their jobs and doing all they can to keep from getting infected. But unfortunately, it's happening, and it's happening like wildfire. So again, to the healthcare employees, to the sheriff's deputies, let's keep things going, and hopefully this will all be over soon, and we can have a good 2021. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Mr. Pryor. Mr. Knox.
Good afternoon. Happy New Year to everybody. Looking forward to a big year working with everyone. And just on Mr. Pryor's point, you know, we had a similar surge in our departmental staff after Thanksgiving. So between Christmas and New Year's, I actually ordered 100% of our staff teleworking. And I never would have thought we had anybody teleworking before this pandemic started, but to have our consultants answering phone calls from taxpayers from home and asking people to do all kinds of things differently than before. It shows how adaptable we are. But yeah, scary times given the surge, especially when I just get an email every day from my HR with another positive COVID, and we're a small department. So yeah, we're hanging in there, and I wish all the best for everyone here.
Thank you, Mr. Knox. Mr. Santo?
Yes, thank you. I was informed by Mr. Kryman this morning that one of our colleagues, Simon Russin, passed away yesterday. Rest in peace, Simon. Probably Mr. Robbins is one of the few board members who work with Mr. Russin. I believe he's spent 25 years on the Board of Investments and another 24, 22 years or something like that in the Board of Retirement. Might be inverse, but he dedicated his entire adult life to LACERA. One of the advices that he told me early on is, we always need to keep an eye on the county treasurer because I work for the board of supervisors and the issue of conflict. And a lot of many other advice that he gave me But this is an individual that was totally committed to LACERA. He was a man of integrity. And he, once he decided to do something, he followed through no matter what. And even though STAU supported him all those years, at the end, he decided that he was going to go his own way. So it's sad to see one of our colleagues go. And I know him and I had some disputes, political disputes, on how best to serve LACERA. But nevertheless, I had a lot of respect, or I do have a lot of respect for him. And it's something that we should remember. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Santos. Ms. Gray?
It's very hard to follow that. I only ask that he rest in peace. Even after he left our board, he came to meetings consistently all the time. And he still, had an influence on even staff. I mean, he was friends with everyone. And as Mr. Santos said, Mr. Robbins is probably one of the few board members who knew him well, because they've been around about the same time. May he rest in peace. And Happy New Year to everyone. Please stay safe. I mean, it's not only crazy in LA County, it's just hard to keep, concentrating and looking at the news and looking at the fact that, there are protesters storming our Capitol. And, you start wondering what is becoming right now. 2021 is supposed to be our new year back to the road to normalcy. And I hope that we can get there. So everyone, please stay safe.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Mr. Oakham?
Yes, I just reiterate what everybody has said. Let's hope everything passes soon and we get this vaccine going, and hopefully by June 1st, we're in much better shape. But we'll see what happens the next 2 weeks after Christmas. It's just incredible that people aren't being more careful. My kids have told us we don't go to the market, and I'm not going out of the house very often. So we're trying to be safe. And Happy New Year to everybody, and please be safe.
Thank you, Mr. Oakham. Mr. Moore?
Okay, I happen to be in Washington, D.C. again, and we came before Christmas so we could spend time with our daughter and son and grandson here. So we've been here that whole time, and I'm kind of glad I'm not in Los Angeles, because from what I see on the news reports, everybody's having a heck of a time dealing with all the things that are going on. It's just terrible. And then I'm here in Washington, D.C., where, as Vivian just said, the Capitol is being stormed by all these people. It's unbelievable. I mean, I have it on TV in here, and so every now and then I go and see, and it's just amazing what's going on. So while we were hoping for 2021 to be better, it sure isn't starting off like that. So maybe it'll change and it'll end up in a much better place. So just everyone stay safe and keep trying to do everything you can to move our country forward, because this is a really bad time.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Kehoe?
Thank you. I had the distinct pleasure of serving with Simon Resson on the board, and everything that Herman said is absolutely 100% true. He'll be deeply missed, and I'm saddened to hear the news. So I'll be praying for him and his family. Also would like to thank Herman for his service last year as the chair. I think he did an outstanding job. Welcome Alan as the chair, and thank Vivian and Gina for stepping up again for this year. So looking forward to the year ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Kehoe. Mr. Robbins?
I agree with the comment about the outgoing board members. Thanks for their efforts, their time, and their services, and wish the incoming officers all of the best. Mr. Moore, I couldn't agree with your comments more. We were hoping that 21 would be a better year than 20. It's sure as hell not starting out that way. I too have a TV on in the other room, and where I'm sitting here at my computer, I can look at it, and there were hundreds of protesters that actually got inside the Hall of Presidents at the Capitol. That's unconscionable to me. And I would imagine that the public safety people in DC are going to have a lot of questions to answer, because this thing got way out of hand and they should have seen it coming. Will, I agreed with everything that you said, and the irony of what you said, I'm sitting here and I read an article in the LA Times this morning that 50% of the LA Fire Department refused to get vaccinated. To me, that is mind-numbing that people would not get vaccinated. If you've had COVID and you have the antibodies in your system, there's no need to get vaccinated until the antibodies begin to decrease. And I have two doctor buddies that have both had it, and they check their antibodies about every 2 weeks. Once their antibodies begin to go down, they will get the vaccination. But I don't understand not getting it. I can't wait. My wife and I can't wait to get ours. So, and this economy is not ever coming back until we get COVID under control. And anybody that thinks otherwise, in my opinion, is somewhat delusional. We have to put COVID in the rearview mirror. I don't see anything getting appreciably better until midsummer, and that's only if we can get the vaccine out. And so far, we've done a pretty poor job of that. Other than that, best of luck to everybody, and you can fire away, Will.
Well, those that are curious, we did have about a 75 to 80%, and I'm just basing that on the paperwork I've seen, inoculation rate. About 20%, a little over 20% of employees declined. And that was after a very intensive educational campaign on the part of the department to what the vaccine really is, and a lot of truths about what is and what the vaccine is not. And I think that not only for LACERA, but for the county in general, be ready, because when it comes time to vaccinate people, you really have to inform and educate on what that vaccine is. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins and Mr. Pryor. Mr. Harris.
Well, I have to say, just about everything has been said. There's not much more I can add to it. I do want to thank Herman for his service last year and congratulate our full slate for the coming year, and wish them well in their endeavors and leading this incredible organization. I too worked with Simon on my first iteration on the board. In fact, he only lives a few blocks from me, and I used to occasionally see him out walking around, and I was very curious as what his status in life was. I'm very sorry to hear of his passing. He was an interesting individual, to say the least, and he was a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the retirement system. I would like to ask that we adjourn our meeting today in the memory of a retired LA Sheriff's Department Division Chief and former Orange County Sheriff, Sandra Hutchins, who you may well know passed away on January 4th from a recurrence of her cancer. If you missed it, there was a really nice obit piece in the California section of yesterday's LA Times. She will be very much missed. She was an incredible human being, an incredible sheriff. I think they broke the mold when they made Sandy, and I haven't met a person yet who didn't just love her and admire her. So if we would please adjourn in her memory, I would appreciate that.
And without objection, we will.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Ms. Zapanta?
Just happy 2021 to everyone. Our fingers are crossed that it will be a better year, and that congratulations to everyone on the board. Herman, thank you for your service. And I too am a huge proponent of inoculation, and I've heard the same resistance to it. And I just, be prepared. Like I forgot who mentioned it, but let's just be prepared to offer more education information in the hopes that we can convince more people to get the vaccine. And everyone stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zapanta. JJ?
Thank you very much. And a happy new year to everybody. And I too have been glancing, I have a TV here and I'm glancing at the news and scary stuff going on in Washington. I just wanted to say one thing about Simon Russin, just to share a memory that immediately came to mind considering everything that's going on is I remember Simon, I think he used to work for the Department of Public Health, if I'm not incorrect. And he would never shake a hand. He would always do like an elbow bump. And I asked him one day, why do you do that? And he said, well, it's to, protect himself from germs. And I'm thinking about, well, geez, he was so far ahead of his time on that, considering everything that's going on in our world today. And, so sorry to hear of his passing. And I hope that everybody, otherwise, I hope everybody has a wonderful year. And I hope that 2021 is a much, much better year for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, JJ. Steve?
I'm very sorry to hear about Simon Russin's passing. He wasn't a trustee when I joined LACERA in 2015, but I got to know Simon. And the first way I got to know Simon was right after I started. He would come up to me during board meetings and whisper on my ear, they're doing this wrong, or giving me a perspective or some information. And then after a time, he started to sit behind me and he had this stage whisper. I always smile when I think back on Simon. We also had a number of conversations about different issues. He was clearly passionate about LACERA, and again, I will remember him fondly. Congratulations to Mr. Bernstein and the other board officers, as well as the committee members who were elected today, and Happy New Year to all. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Santos Kryman?
Hi. Thank you. I've never had the opportunity to meet Mr. Russin, but I do want to not only recognize his service to LACERA, but my understanding is that he did provide very valuable service to the LA County residents as the chief environmental health person at the Department of Public Health. And so I want to make sure that we recognize his service not only to our LACERA members in that capacity as a trustee, but also in his day-to-day profession as a member of the Public Health Department. So I also want to wish everybody a happy new year and a COVID-free 2021. I'm hopeful that our efforts, JJ and I and our team, we're singularly focused to make sure that 2021 is going to be very, very successful for everyone involved. And we're happy to welcome Mr. Bernstein and Vivian, Ms. Gray, also moving forward. I think it's going to be important in terms of providing the leadership and making sure that we create the environment, the safe environment that our staff really needs, quite frankly, in order to perform their duties. And so that's what we're going to be focused in on, making sure that we get the environment right and make sure that we support our staff and support our trustees to make sure that we move the organization forward. And so I'm looking forward to 2021. I think it does have a great deal of promise moving forward. So thank you for that. And I appreciate and I look forward to working with you, Mr. Bernstein, as the chair of the board.
Thank you. And lastly, Chair Bernstein.
So thank you, everyone. It's good to be back. I missed you all last year. I watched from the BOI side, but it's really good to be back. And I did not know Sheriff Hutchins, but I did have the opportunity to read up about her. I'm very glad we're adjourning in her memory. We should. And I don't think Mr. Harris mentioned this. She was the first Orange County sheriff, female sheriff. And I just, as the father of 2 teenage girls, I just think it's really important to lift up our sheroes and to acknowledge that there are ceilings to break and there are more to be broken, but as they get broken, it's important to acknowledge them. I did have the opportunity to serve my first few years with Mr. Russin, and I want to thank everyone who spoke so well and accurately about him, about his history of service, and about his commitment to LACERA and our mission. And I don't think anyone asked for this, so without objection, we will also adjourn today in his memory as well as Sheriff Hutchins. As far as the vaccination, I'm actually the father of 3 teenagers. I've learned that I have very little power to tell anyone else what to do, but I think there is value in saying what I'm going to do. I also think it's important to acknowledge, particularly as a white person, that we have a history in our country of not always treating bodies of color medically with respect, and that some of the anxiety and apprehension is founded on history. So all I can and will say is that I will not jump the line for the vaccination, but when I am offered it, I will be in line and I will be on time to get it. And I would encourage other people to think about the same. Finally, I want to also thank Mr. Santos for his year of excellent service last year and his continued service to both boards where we value him so much. I want to thank everyone else who stepped up to take leadership, and I appreciate your trust in me for the year. And I just want to mention that part of our reorganization process is restaffing each of the committees. I really want to give people opportunities to serve where they'd like to serve. I'll ask Bonnie to send out an email to prompt people to give an indication of where you'd like to serve, and I will do my best to place people where they'd like to be placed for service on committees. Finally, I just, given the chaos and how distracting it is, but given the fact that I know that we all wish to give Mr. Wade the attention his appeal deserves, I would ask that we just push through and continue the meeting and get done as quickly as we can. So if there's no objection, we will go into executive session so that we can try to get this wrapped up as quickly and appropriately as possible so that we can pay attention to these important things going on in DC.
Mr. Chairman, can I say one last thing?
You may.
Regarding Simon Russin, I didn't want to disrespect Simon. I came on the board in 1997. Simon was here long before I showed up. I used to attend retirement board meetings when we met in the Hall of Administration long before the move to Lake Street. And Simon would be at those meetings, if not on the board, as just an observer. He was the ultimate fiduciary. He was the ultimate conscience of keeping the system funded and doing the things and making the decisions that put us in the position where LACERA is today. As far as Sandy Hutchins goes, my time with Sandy goes back to the early 80s. She was a member of my negotiating team at ALADS. I needed a female deputy. Sandy stepped up as a young deputy and sat at the bargaining table. I think for 2 contracts, she was an amazing person. JP was her aide when she was the division chief. Her first husband was a close friend of JP and mine, and Dave is living in Phoenix area, but they don't make them like Sandy. JP hit the nail on the head. I don't know anybody that has anything bad to say about her. She is just an extraordinary human being. So I'm sorry, but I meant to say that initially.
Absolutely. And who else wanted to add a comment?
That was Will. I just threw it out on chat. I had a quick recommendation that we save the adjournment for Simon Russin for next disability meeting. One of Simon's star accomplishments was he never missed a disability meeting in 30 years. And I don't suggest we start now. So if we could parlay that adjournment in memory of Simon to the disability meeting, I feel it would be appropriate, but I'm only one of many.
Without objection, we will adopt Mr. Pryor's recommendation and adjourn in memory of Mr. Russin next week. Seeing no objection, we'll do so. All right. Then in that case, we do need to clear for executive session. Trustees, hang tight, and staff, if you can get us ready for executive session, that would be terrific.
Thank you.